Widow's daughter heals cowboy, not knowing he will repay with love. Tonight, we bring you a tale of forbidden compassion in the unforgiving winter of 1882 Nebraska, where a desperate widow risks everything to save a dying stranger, unknowing that her mercy will ignite a love that defies an entire town's judgment. Will Hannah Cooper's courage be enough to protect her family from ruin? Stay with us until the very end, and comment below with your city name so we can see how far this story travels across the world. The blizzard hit Nebraska like God's own fist, angry and unrelenting. Hannah Cooper pressed her shoulder against the barn door, fighting the wind that screamed through the gap, like a living thing determined to tear the wood from its hinges. Snow whipped across her face, stinging her cheeks until they burned, and her fingers, already numb inside her threadbare gloves, struggled to grip the frozen latch. "Mama!" Samuel's voice cut through the howl of wind, small and frightened from the house behind her. "Mama, come back!" "Stay inside with Grandma," Hannah shouted over her shoulder, though she doubted her 7-year-old son could hear her through the storm. The barn door finally gave way with a groan that sounded almost human, and she stumbled into the relative shelter of the structure, gasping. Darkness enveloped her immediately. The single lantern she'd lit before venturing out had blown out somewhere between the house and here, leaving her in a blackness so complete she might as well have been blind. Her breath came in ragged clouds she couldn't see, and the cold, Lord, the cold was like knives in her lungs. "Just check on Bessie," she muttered to herself, the sound of her own voice a small comfort against the wind's fury. "Make sure she's got enough hay to get through the night, then back to the fire." Her late husband, Thomas, had built this barn with his own hands, back when their farm had promise, back before the accusations and the shame, back before the fever took him and left her alone with a son, a mother-in-law, and a reputation so tarnished that even the preacher's wife crossed the street to avoid her. Hannah shuffled forward, hands outstretched, feet searching for the familiar path between the stalls. Bessie lowed somewhere in the darkness, a sound of bovine concern that made Hannah's heart clench. At least someone was worried about her. Her boot struck something solid, not wood, not a feed sack, something that gave slightly under the pressure, something that had weight and warmth even through the killing cold. Hannah's breath caught. She dropped to her knees, hands searching, and found fabric. A coat, shoulders, a face, cold as marble but not frozen, not quite. A man's face, rough with stubble, lips pale in the darkness she could barely perceive. "God in heaven," she whispered. Her hands moved frantically now, searching for signs of life. She found his chest, pressed her ear against it, and nearly wept when she heard the flutter of a heartbeat, weak and irregular, but there. He was alive. Barely. "Hannah!" Her mother-in-law's voice pierced the storm. Margaret stood silhouetted in the barn doorway, lantern held high, her gray hair whipping loose from its bun. "What in the name of it?" "There's a man," Hannah called back. "He's alive, Mother Margaret, but just barely. Help me." Margaret didn't move. In the lantern light, Hannah could see her face, lined with years of hardship and suspicion, locked in an expression of horror. "A man? Hannah, no. You can't. We can't. He'll die if we leave him here." Hannah was already trying to lift the stranger, getting her hands under his arms. He was dead weight, bigger than Thomas had been, and she grunted with the effort of moving him even an inch. "Please!" For a moment that stretched like eternity, Margaret stood frozen. Then, with a sound that was half prayer and half curse, she set down the lantern and hurried forward. Together they dragged him across the barn floor, through the snow, and into the house. The warmth of the kitchen struck Hannah like a physical blow after the bitter cold. Samuel stood pressed against the far wall, his eyes wide as silver dollars as they hauled the stranger inside. "Samuel, fetch every blanket we have," Hannah ordered, already working to strip off the man's frozen coat. "Move, child!" The boy scrambled up the ladder to the loft where they kept the spare bedding. Margaret shut the door against the storm and turned, her face grim. "Hannah, this is madness. We don't know this man. He could be anyone, a thief, a murderer." "He's dying," Hannah cut her off sharply. She finally got the coat open and her hands came away sticky. Even in the firelight, she could see it clearly. Blood, dark and fresh, soaking through his shirt on the left side. "He's been shot." "Shot!" Margaret's voice rose to a pitch that made Samuel freeze halfway down the ladder, arms full of quilts. "All the more reason to— To what? Let him bleed out on our floor?" Hannah looked up at her mother-in-law, and something in her expression must have been fierce because Margaret actually took a step back. "I've already lost a husband, Mother Margaret. I won't have another death on my conscience because I was too afraid of what the town might say." The mention of the town and its judgment hung in the air between them like smoke. Margaret's jaw worked, her hands twisting in her apron, before she finally nodded once, sharp and reluctant. "Fine, but when this brings more trouble to our door, don't say I didn't warn you." Hannah didn't answer. She was already tearing at the stranger's shirt, exposing the wound beneath. The bullet hole was high on his left side, just below the ribs, still seeping blood in a way that made her stomach turn. She'd seen men die of less. "Samuel, put the blankets on the floor by the fire. Mother Margaret, I need clean cloth, hot water, and that bottle of whiskey Thomas kept hidden in the root cellar." "Whiskey?" Margaret's eyebrows shot up. "I thought you didn't know about that." "I know about everything in this house," Hannah said grimly. "Now, please, we don't have much time." They worked in tense silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of wind outside. Hannah had Samuel help her strip the stranger down to his union suit, trying not to notice the scars that crisscrossed his torso, evidence of a hard life, a violent one. She washed the blood away as gently as she could, revealing the full extent of the damage. The bullet was still in there. She could see the dark shape of it beneath the torn flesh. "I have to take it out," she said, more to herself than to the others. "You're not a doctor, Hannah." Margaret's voice was strained. "No, but I've birthed calves and stitched up Thomas when he got caught on barbed wire. It can't be that different." It was very different, as it turned out. Hannah had never done anything so terrible in her life. The stranger, unconscious though he was, groaned and twitched as she probed the wound with a knife sterilized in the fire. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold draft that crept through the walls. Her hands shook so badly that Margaret finally had to grip her wrist to steady them. "You can do this," her mother-in-law said, and there was something almost kind in her voice. "You're stronger than you know, child." The bullet, when she finally got it out, was small and misshapen. Hannah dropped it into a tin cup with a clink that sounded overloud in the quiet room, then set about stitching the wound closed with thread and a darning needle. Her stitches were crude, uneven, but they held. "Will he live?" Samuel whispered from his corner. Hannah sat back on her heels, exhausted, and looked at the stranger's face. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly now. A man perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and features that might have been handsome if they weren't so pale and drawn with pain. There was something almost peaceful about him now, despite everything. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted. "That's up to God now." They moved him onto the blankets by the fire, covered him with every quilt they owned, and settled in to wait. The storm lasted 3 days. For 3 days, the world beyond their small farmhouse ceased to exist, buried under snow that piled to the windowsills. And for 3 days, the stranger lay fevered and delirious by their fire, hovering between life and death in a way that kept Hannah's nerves stretched taut as wire. She barely slept. Every few hours, she changed the bandage on his wound, watching for signs of infection. She spooned broth between his lips when he was calm enough to swallow, and held him down when the fever made him thrash, muttering words she couldn't understand, names, pleas, fragments of nightmares. "Sarah," he said once, the name broken on his lips. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Didn't mean—" Hannah wondered who Sarah was. A wife? A sister? A woman he'd loved and lost? It wasn't her business, she reminded herself. This man was a stranger, someone she'd saved out of Christian duty and nothing more. Once he was well enough to travel, he'd leave, and they'd never see each other again. Still, there was something about him that tugged at her curiosity. The way his hands, even in fever, curled as if reaching for a gun that wasn't there. The scars on his body that spoke of a dozen close calls with death. The boots by the door, worn but well made, the kind a man with money might wear. "He's trouble," Margaret said on the second night, as they sat together mending while Samuel slept in the loft, You know it as well as I do. Perhaps, Hannah allowed. Her needle flashed in the firelight as she repaired one of Samuel's shirts. But he's also a human being who needed help. The town won't see it that way. Hannah's needle stilled. The town, she said carefully, already thinks the worst of us. What's one more sin to add to the list? Margaret flinched. They both knew what she meant. Thomas Cooper had died with a reputation as a horse thief, an accusation that was never proven but never forgotten either. The shame of it had marked them all, turned them into pariahs in a community that had once welcomed them. This is different, Margaret insisted, taking in a strange man, unmarried, shot by God knows who for God knows what reason. Hannah, they could take Samuel away from you. The church elders have been looking for any excuse. They won't take my son. Hannah's voice was steel. I won't let them. But even as she said it, fear curled in her stomach. Margaret was right. The town had been watching them, waiting for Hannah to make a mistake that would justify their worst assumptions. And now here she was, with a bleeding stranger in her house, and no way to explain it that wouldn't sound damning. The stranger groaned, drawing both their attention. Hannah set aside her mending and went to him, pressing a hand to his forehead. Still burning hot. The fever needs to break soon, she murmured. Or else, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. On the morning of the fourth day, Hannah woke to silence. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a world transformed. Sunlight streamed through the window, blindingly bright against the snow, and for a moment she simply lay there, marveling at the peace of it. Then she remembered the stranger. She was on her feet in an instant, scrambling down from the loft where she'd finally allowed herself a few hours of sleep. He lay where they'd left him, so still that her heart lurched. But then she saw the gentle rise and fall of his chest, steady and strong. His eyes were open. Hannah stopped short, one hand gripping the ladder, and stared at him. He stared back, his gaze a startling gray blue in the morning light, clear and aware in a way they hadn't been for days. "You're awake," she breathed. He blinked slowly, his throat working. When he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel. "Where am I?" "Our farm, about 15 miles west of Cedar Falls." Hannah descended the rest of the ladder carefully, trying to calm her racing heart. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. You were shot, do you remember?" Something flickered across his face, pain or memory, or both. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I remember." "Who shot you?" His jaw tightened. "No one you need to worry about." "I dug a bullet out of your side," Hannah said, more sharply than she intended. "I think that gives me a right to worry." For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Hannah felt suddenly acutely aware of her appearance, her hair falling loose from its braid, her dress rumpled from days of wear, the shadows under her eyes from lack of sleep. She must look like a fright, but there was no judgment in his gaze. If anything, there was something like wonder. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "Why?" "Because you would have died if I hadn't." "Most folks would have left me in that barn." "Then most folks are cowards," Hannah said bluntly. "Now are you going to tell me your name, or should I keep calling you the stranger in my head?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Luke," he said. "Luke Maddox." "Hannah Cooper. That's my son Samuel up in the loft. Don't wake him. He's finally sleeping properly. And my mother-in-law Margaret is out checking on the animals. Are you hungry?" "Starving." "Can you sit up?" Luke tried and immediately went pale, pressing a hand to his bandaged side. "Maybe. Not yet." "Then you'll eat lying down." Hannah was already moving toward the stove, ladling out the last of the broth she'd made yesterday. "You need to build your strength back up. That wound is going to take time to heal." "How long?" "Weeks, if you're lucky. Months, if you're not." She brought the bowl to him, kneeling beside the blankets. "Why? Are you in a hurry to leave?" Something dark crossed his face. "The men who shot me. They might come looking." Hannah's hand stilled on the bowl. "Are you saying you've brought danger to our door, Mr. Maddox?" "Luke," he corrected. "And I don't know. Maybe. They thought I was dead when they left me. The storm probably covered my tracks. But if they find out I survived—" He looked away, jaw clenched. "I should go. Soon as I can ride." "You can't even sit up. I'll manage." "Don't be a fool." Hannah pressed the bowl into his hands, her tone brooking no argument. "You'll stay until you're well enough to travel without killing yourself. After that, you can ride to wherever you need to go." Luke stared at her, and for a moment she thought he might argue, but then he nodded slowly, accepting the broth with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Hannah stood, brushing off her skirts. "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Maddox. You haven't met the town elders." Margaret returned from the barn looking like a woman who'd aged 10 years overnight. Snow clung to her shawl, and her face was pinched with cold and worry. "Bessie's fine," she announced, stamping her feet on the threshold. "Though we're low on feed, I'll need to—" She stopped short, her eyes landing on Luke, who was now sitting propped against a stack of blankets, looking exhausted but decidedly alive. "Oh, you're awake." "Yes, ma'am," Luke said, "and grateful for your hospitality." Margaret's expression didn't soften. "Grateful enough to tell us who shot you and whether they'll be coming after you here." "Mother Margaret," Hannah started, but Luke held up a hand. "It's a fair question." He looked between the two women, something resigned in his eyes. "I was riding with a group of men, drovers, taking cattle up to Montana. There was a disagreement about payment. Some of them thought the foreman was cheating us, wanted to take what they thought they were owed by force. I disagreed with their methods." "So they shot you," Margaret said flatly. "After I refused to help them rob the man who'd hired us. Yes." Luke's voice was steady, but Hannah could hear the exhaustion beneath it. "I got away, barely, but my horse threw me in the storm. I must have crawled to your barn on instinct. After that—" He shrugged, then winced at the movement. Hannah exchanged a glance with Margaret. It was a plausible story, and it painted Luke as something other than a criminal, a man who'd chosen honor over easy money and nearly died for it. But was it true? "These men who shot you," Margaret pressed. "How many?" "3. "And they think you're dead?" "I hope so." "Hope?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "That's a thin shield to hide behind, Mr. Maddox." "I know." Luke met her gaze squarely. "And I'll leave as soon as I'm able. I have no wish to bring trouble to your door." "Too late for that," Margaret muttered. But some of the hostility had drained from her posture. She moved to the stove, busying herself with stoking the fire. "We'll discuss it more when you're stronger. For now, you're stuck with us, like it or not." Samuel chose that moment to wake, his tousled head appearing over the edge of the loft. "Mama? Is the storm over?" "Yes, sweetheart. Come down and have breakfast." The boy descended the ladder with the easy grace of youth, but stopped short when he saw Luke sitting up. For a long moment, child and man regarded each other. "You're the man from the barn," Samuel said finally. "That's right." Luke's voice gentled in a way that surprised Hannah. "Your mama tells me you've been very brave while I was sick." Samuel puffed up slightly. "I helped get blankets, and I didn't cry, even when you were moaning scary." "That is brave. I'm sorry if I frightened you." "It's okay. Mama said you were having nightmares. I get those sometimes too." Something flickered in Luke's eyes, pain or recognition or some emotion Hannah couldn't name. "What do you do when you have nightmares, Samuel?" The boy thought about it seriously. "Mama says I should think about good things, like catching frogs in summer or Grandma's apple pie." "That's good advice." "What do you think about?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "I'll have to find something good to think about. Maybe you can help me with that." Samuel grinned, gap-toothed and bright, and just like that, the tension in the room eased. Hannah watched as her son chattered away to Luke about the farm, the animals, the barn cat who'd had kittens last spring, all the small, important things that made up a child's world. And Luke listened, really listened, in a way that made something warm unfold in Hannah's chest. It was dangerous, that warmth. She recognized it for what it was, the beginning of trust, maybe even affection. This man was a stranger, someone who would leave as soon as he could ride. Getting attached would only lead to hurt. But watching Samuel's face light up as he talked, watching Luke's careful smile, she couldn't quite bring herself to stop it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Hannah woke before dawn to tend to Luke's wound, changing the bandages with practiced efficiency while he gritted his teeth against the pain. The stitches were holding, thank God, and there was no sign of infection, just the slow, stubborn process of healing. Margaret watched them both with wary eyes, but said little. She busied herself with household tasks, cooking and cleaning with a fervor that spoke of her need to control something in a situation that felt increasingly beyond control. And Samuel had found a new hero. The boy followed Luke everywhere, or at least everywhere Luke could manage to go in his weakened state. He brought him water without being asked, fetched books from the shelf to read aloud in his halting, earnest voice, and peppered him with questions about cattle drives, the territories out west, whether he'd ever seen a real Indian. "My pa told me about Indians," Samuel said one afternoon, curled up beside Luke's pallet while Hannah mended socks nearby. "He said some of them are friendly and some aren't, just like white folks." Luke, who'd been dozing, opened one eye. "Your pa was a wise man." Samuel's face fell. "He died last winter. Fever took him." "I'm sorry." "Mama cried a lot, but she doesn't anymore. She says we have to be strong." Hannah's hand stilled on her mending. She hadn't realized Samuel had noticed her tears or her efforts to hide them. Guilt pricked at her heart. Luke looked at her over Samuel's head, and something in his gaze was gentle, understanding. "Your mama is strong," he said to Samuel. "One of the strongest people I've ever met." "How can you tell?" "Because she saved my life when most folks would have turned away. That takes a special kind of courage." Samuel considered this gravely. "Are you going to stay after you get better?" The question hung in the air. Hannah found herself holding her breath, waiting for the answer even though she already knew it. "I can't, son," Luke said softly. "I have to keep moving, but I'll never forget what your family did for me." "Oh." Samuel's disappointment was palpable. "Will you come back?" "I don't know." It was an honest answer, at least. Hannah appreciated that, even as it made her heart ache for her son's sake. That night, after Samuel had gone to bed, Luke asked Hannah to help him walk. "You're not ready," she protested, but he was already struggling to his feet, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. "I need to know if I can," he insisted. "I can't stay here forever, Mrs. Cooper. You know that." She did know it, but that didn't make it easier. She got under his shoulder, taking most of his weight as they made slow, painful progress across the kitchen. He was heavier than she expected, all solid muscle despite the weeks of fever, and she could feel the heat of him through their clothes, the tremble in his legs as he fought to stay upright. "That's enough," she said after they'd made it to the far wall and back. "Any more, and you'll tear your stitches." Luke didn't argue, sinking back onto his pallet with a grunt of pain. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing was labored. "You're getting stronger," Hannah offered, fetching a cloth to wipe his face. "Another week, maybe 2, and you'll be able to ride. And then I'll be gone, and you'll be rid of me." His voice was rough, but there was something in it that made her pause. "We won't be rid of you, Mr. Maddox. Samuel's gotten attached." "Just Samuel?" Hannah's hand stilled on his forehead. She looked down at him, at the intensity in his gray-blue eyes, and felt her breath catch. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but it was a lie, and they both knew it. Luke reached up, his fingers brushing against hers where they held the cloth. "I think you do." For a moment, they stayed like that, frozen in something that felt dangerously like the beginning of something neither of them could afford. Hannah's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. Then Margaret's footsteps sounded on the stairs, and Hannah jerked back, the cloth falling forgotten to the floor. "I should let you rest," she said, her voice shakier than she wanted. "Good night, Mr. Maddox." She fled to the loft before he could respond, her cheeks burning. Behind her, Luke lay in the firelight, staring at the ceiling, one hand still raised as if he could catch something that had already slipped through his fingers. The thaw came slowly, melting snow revealing the dead brown grass beneath. With it came visitors. Hannah was hanging laundry in the weak February sun when she heard the horses. 2 of them, picking their way carefully up the muddy track that passed for a road to their farm. Her stomach dropped. Visitors meant trouble. They always did. "Margaret," she called toward the house. "Someone's coming." Her mother-in-law appeared in the doorway, Luke behind her. He was mobile now, able to walk without assistance, though he still tired easily. His hand went automatically to his hip, where a gun would hang if he had one. "Inside," Hannah told him sharply. "Now." "Hannah, they can't see you, please." Something in her voice must have convinced him. Luke retreated into the house, and Margaret followed, leaving Hannah to face the visitors alone. She recognized them as they drew closer. Pastor Yates and Cyrus Blackwell, one of the town elders. Both wore expressions of grim determination that made Hannah's heart sink further. "Mrs. Cooper," Pastor Yates greeted her, tipping his hat but not dismounting. "Might we have a word?" "Of course, Pastor, though I'm afraid I haven't much to offer you. We weren't expecting company." "This isn't a social call." Cyrus Blackwell was a heavy-set man with a florid face and small, suspicious eyes. "We've heard some concerning reports." Hannah's hands tightened on the wet sheet she was holding. "Reports?" "The storm was fierce," Pastor Yates said, his tone deceptively gentle. "We've been checking on families, making sure everyone weathered it safely. But we heard from the Henderson boy. He was out checking trap lines and claims he saw smoke from your chimney for days on end. More smoke than a small household would make." "We kept the fire high against the cold," Hannah said carefully. "Surely that's not a crime." "No," Blackwell agreed. "But the boy also said he thought he saw a horse in your barn, a big bay gelding that wasn't there before the storm." Hannah's blood ran cold. Luke's horse, they hadn't even thought about the horse. It must have found its way to the barn seeking shelter. "I haven't seen any strange horse," she said, which was technically true. She'd been too busy keeping Luke alive to go through the barn thoroughly. "Mind if we check?" Blackwell was already dismounting. "Actually, I do mind." Hannah stepped forward, placing herself between the men and her barn. "This is my property, Mr. Blackwell. If you have accusations to make them plainly. Otherwise, I'll ask you to leave." Pastor Yates' face creased with what might have been genuine concern. "Hannah, Mrs. Cooper, we're not trying to cause trouble, but you must understand, a woman alone with a child in these times, we have a responsibility to ensure your safety and moral welfare." "My moral welfare is my own concern." "Is it?" Blackwell's voice hardened. "Your late husband's reputation still casts a shadow over this family, Mrs. Cooper. The church has been lenient, but there are limits to our tolerance. If you're harboring someone, hiding something that could bring shame to our community, the only thing I'm hiding is my patience with this interrogation." Hannah cut him off, her temper flaring. "I'm a widow trying to provide for my family. If that offends your sensibilities, then I suggest you take your concerns to God and leave me in peace." For a moment, she thought Blackwell might push past her to the barn anyway. His face reddened, his jaw working with anger. But Pastor Yates put a hand on his arm. "Cyrus, that's enough. Mrs. Cooper has answered our questions." "Barely," Blackwell muttered, but he remounted his horse with ill grace. Pastor Yates lingered a moment longer. "Hannah," he said quietly, "I hope you know that the church stands ready to help you. If you're in any kind of trouble, I'm not. Or if you need guidance, spiritual or otherwise, please, don't let pride keep you from seeking support." There was genuine kindness in his eyes, which somehow made it worse. Hannah felt tears prick at her own, but refused to let them fall. "Thank you, Pastor, but we're managing just fine." He nodded slowly, sadly, and turned his horse toward town. Blackwell followed without another word, though the look he threw over his shoulder promised this wasn't over. Hannah stood in the yard until they disappeared from sight, her legs trembling so badly she thought she might collapse. When she finally turned back to the house, she found Luke standing in the doorway, his face ashen. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have thought about the horse. I should have—" "It doesn't matter now." Hannah pushed past him into the house, suddenly desperate for the warmth of the fire. "They're suspicious, but they have no proof. As long as you stay out of sight when anyone comes by—" "Hannah, I can't do this to you." Luke followed her inside, his voice urgent. "I can't let you risk everything for me. Your son, your home, your reputation. are already compromised in case you hadn't noticed. Hannah whirled on him, and all the fear and anger and frustration of the past weeks came pouring out. My husband died a suspected thief. The town thinks I'm one step from ruin as it is. Helping you doesn't change that. It makes it worse. Maybe. She was shouting now, didn't care. Maybe it does. But it was my choice, Luke Maddox. Mine. And I don't regret it. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Margaret stood by the stove, silent witness to the confrontation. Samuel peered down from the loft, eyes wide. Luke's face worked with emotion. Why? He asked, echoing his question from that first morning. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Hannah took a shaky breath, trying to gather the scattered pieces of her composure. Because, she said finally, I'm tired of living in fear. Tired of letting what other people think dictate every choice I make. When I found you in that barn, dying in the snow, I had a choice. Save you and face the consequences, or let you die and stay safe. And you chose? I chose to live with myself. Her voice broke slightly. I chose to show my son that mercy matters more than reputation. That doing right is more important than being accepted. Maybe that makes me a fool, but it's who I am. For a long moment, Luke just stared at her. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression. Something like awe or wonder, or the beginning of a feeling too complicated to name. You're not a fool, he said softly. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Hannah's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Margaret cleared her throat pointedly. Well, she said briskly, now that we've established Hannah's remarkable courage and your undying gratitude, perhaps we should discuss what happens next. Those men will be back, mark my words, and next time they'll bring others. She was right, of course. Pastor Yates might be satisfied for now, but Blackwell would dig deeper, ask more questions. It was only a matter of time before someone discovered the truth. I'll leave, Luke said immediately. Tonight. If I can. You're still healing, Hannah protested. I can ride. I'll manage. To where? You said yourself the men who shot you might still be looking, and you have no money, no supplies. Luke, you'll die out there. Better me than you and your family facing the town's judgment. No. The word came out fierce, final. I didn't save your life just so you could throw it away on some misguided sense of honor. Luke's jaw clenched. Then what do you suggest? Hannah thought frantically, her mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as quickly. Hide him? The farm was too small, too exposed. Send him away with supplies? He was still too weak, and Winter wasn't done with them yet. Lie to the town? They were already suspicious. More lies would only make it worse. We tell the truth, she said finally. Margaret gasped. Hannah? No. Not all of it, but enough. Hannah's mind was clearing now, a plan forming. We say Luke is a cousin from back east. He came west looking for work and got caught in the storm. We took him in because he's family. They'll want proof, Margaret said. Names, dates, connections. Then we'll give it to them. Luke, what's your mother's maiden name? He blinked at the sudden question. Morrison, why? And your grandmother? Whitfield, I think, my father's mother. Hannah nodded, the pieces falling into place. Morrison. My grandmother's name was Morrison, or it will have been, as far as the town knows. That makes us distant cousins, connected through the maternal line. It's thin, but it's enough to explain why you came here, why we took you in. They'll still talk, Margaret warned. A young widow with an unmarried man under her roof, cousin or not, let them talk. Hannah's voice was steel. We've done nothing wrong, and if they push too hard, we push back. Remind them that Christian charity demands we help family in need. Quote scripture at them if we have to. Luke was looking at her with something like admiration. You've thought this through. I've had to think through everything since Thomas died. How to keep this farm running, how to protect Samuel, how to survive in a town that wants nothing more than to see us fail. She met his gaze squarely. I won't let them win, Luke. Not over this. The determination in her voice seemed to settle something. Luke nodded slowly. Cousin it is, then. Good. Hannah squared her shoulders. We'll need to get our story straight. Details matter. And Luke, you'll need to be seen helping around the farm. Nothing too strenuous, you're still recovering, but enough to show you're earning your keep. I can do that. And when spring comes, when you're well enough to travel safely, Hannah paused, something tightening in her chest at the thought. Then you can decide what you want to do. Stay or go. But it will be your choice, not one forced by fear. Luke studied her face for a long moment, and Hannah had the distinct impression he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. You're giving me a choice, he said quietly. After everything. Everyone deserves choices, Mr. Maddox. Luke, he corrected, just as he had before. If we're going to be cousins, you should probably call me Luke. Despite everything, the danger, the fear, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Hannah found herself smiling. All right then, Cousin Luke. From the loft, Samuel let out a delighted laugh. Does this mean Luke gets to stay? Hannah looked up at her son, then at Margaret's worried face, then at Luke, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For now, she said. For now, he stays. And deep in her heart, in a place she didn't dare examine too closely, she hoped for now might become something more. The morning after their decision brought a cold clarity that settled over the farmhouse like frost on glass. Hannah woke before dawn, her mind already racing through the details of the story they would tell, the questions they would need to answer, the careful dance of half-truths that might, just might, keep them all safe. Luke was already awake when she climbed down from the loft. He sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands, staring into the fire with an expression that spoke of sleepless hours and heavy thoughts. Couldn't rest? Hannah asked quietly, mindful of Samuel and Margaret still sleeping. He looked up, and in the pre-dawn dimness, his eyes seemed darker, shadowed. Kept thinking about what could go wrong, the holes in our story, the ways it could fall apart. Hannah poured herself coffee and sat across from him. The table was scarred and worn, marked by years of family meals and Thomas's habit of carving small notches when he was thinking. She traced one of those notches now, finding comfort in the familiar groove. Tell me about your family, she said. The real story. If we're going to lie convincingly, we need to know the truth beneath it. Luke's hands tightened on his cup. Why? Because the best lies are built on truth, and because... She hesitated, then pressed on. Because I want to know who you really are, Luke Maddox. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The fire crackled, and somewhere outside a rooster heralded the coming dawn. When Luke finally answered, his voice was rough with memory. I grew up in Missouri. Small farm, not much different from this one. My father worked himself to death trying to make it profitable, and my mother followed him to the grave within a year. I was 15. He paused, his jaw working. I had a sister, Sarah. She was 12. Hannah's breath caught. Sarah, the name he'd called out in his fever dreams. What happened to her? I couldn't take care of her, couldn't keep the farm, so I took her to our aunt in St. Louis, promised I'd come back when I'd made enough money to give her a proper home. His voice cracked slightly. That was 18 years ago. I've been working cattle drives, taking whatever jobs I could find, sending money when I had it, but I never went back. Why not? Luke's laugh was bitter. Shame, maybe, or fear. What if she didn't want to see me? What if she'd built a life without me, and I was just a reminder of everything she'd lost? He set down his cup with a thud. Easier to keep moving, keep sending money, and tell myself I was doing the right thing. Hannah absorbed this, seeing in his confession the same kind of guilt and grief she'd carried since Thomas's death. The weight of choices made and chances lost, the what-ifs that haunted the small hours of the morning. Do you know where she is now? She asked gently. Last letter I got was 3 years ago. She'd married a shopkeeper, had a baby on the way. She sounded happy. He looked at Hannah, and there was such naked pain in his eyes that she wanted to reach across the table and take his hand. She didn't ask me to visit, didn't ask about my life. It was like writing to a stranger. Perhaps she thought you wanted it that way. Maybe I did. Luke scrubbed a hand over his face. Maybe I still do. Some things are easier to carry when you're alone. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Hannah thought of the loneliness she'd felt since Thomas died, the way she'd shouldered every burden because asking for help meant admitting weakness, meant giving the town more ammunition to use against her. "You're not alone now," she said quietly. "For whatever time you're here, you have us." Luke met her gaze, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore, a glimpse of the man beneath the scars and the careful distance. "I don't deserve that," he said. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. It just is." Before he could respond, Margaret's footsteps sounded on the stairs. The moment broke, and they both looked away, the intimacy dissolving like morning mist. But something had changed between them. Hannah felt it in the air, in the careful way they moved around each other as the household woke and the day began. A recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. They spent the morning preparing their story. Margaret, despite her reservations, proved surprisingly adept at constructing the necessary framework of lies. She'd known Hannah's grandmother, the real one, and could speak convincingly about the Morrison family line, adding just enough truth to make the fiction believable. "Your grandmother's cousin married a man named Maddox," Margaret told Luke, her finger tracing an imaginary family tree on the table. "That would make you and Hannah third cousins, connected through the female line. It's distant enough that no one would expect you to have met before, but close enough to justify taking you in." "And my reason for coming here?" Luke asked. "Work," Hannah said immediately. "The railroads are hiring, and you heard there might be opportunities out west. You stopped here because you knew, or thought you had family nearby." "But I got caught in the storm before I could reach town," Luke continued, picking up the thread. "By the time it cleared, I was sick with fever from exposure. You nursed me back to health." "It's thin," Margaret said, frowning, "but it might hold if we're consistent." Samuel, who'd been listening with rapt attention, piped up. "What about the bullet hole?" 3 pairs of adult eyes turned to him. Hannah's stomach dropped. In all their planning, they'd forgotten the most obvious problem. "The wound," Luke said slowly. "If anyone sees it, if any of the town women come to help with spring cleaning, or if I get hurt working and need a doctor—" "We can't hide it," Hannah finished, "and we can't explain it away." Silence fell over the table. This was the flaw that could unravel everything, the one detail that no amount of clever storytelling could fix. "Hunting accident," Margaret said suddenly, "before you got here. You were hunting for food on your way west and your rifle misfired. The wound got infected, which is why you had the fever." Luke shook his head. "The scars from a pistol, close range. Anyone who knows guns will see that." "Then we don't let anyone see it," Hannah said firmly. "You keep your shirt on. You don't go swimming in the creek come summer. And if anyone asks directly, you say it's a private matter. Men have scars from their past. No one will push too hard if you make it clear the subject is closed." It wasn't a perfect solution, but as the morning wore on and they refined their story, testing it against imagined questions and suspicious neighbors, it began to feel almost possible, almost real. Luke practiced calling Hannah cousin until it sounded natural. They invented shared childhood memories, generic enough to be unverifiable, specific enough to sound genuine. Margaret drilled them both on family names and dates until Hannah's head spun with fictional ancestors and imagined connections. By the time the sun reached its zenith, they were as ready as they'd ever be. "Now comes the hard part," Margaret said, untying her apron. "We need to be seen, together, in town." Hannah's stomach clenched. "Already?" "The longer we wait, the more suspicious it looks. If Luke is truly your cousin, legitimately here and recovering from illness, then there's no reason to hide him. We go to town, we make it known he's here, and we dare anyone to question it." The logic was sound, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Hannah looked at Luke, who'd gone pale despite the weeks of recovery that had brought color back to his cheeks. "She's right," he said quietly. "Hiding makes us look guilty. But Hannah, if this goes wrong, it won't." Hannah stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that only trembled slightly. "Samuel, get your good shirt. We're going to Cedar Falls." The ride to town was tense and silent. They took the wagon, with Margaret driving and Hannah sitting beside her, Luke in the back with Samuel. The boy chattered nervously, pointing out landmarks and asking questions that no one had the attention to answer properly. Hannah watched the familiar landscape roll by. The creek where she and Thomas had courted, the stand of cottonwoods where they'd married, the small cemetery on the hill where he now lay. Every mile brought them closer to judgment, to the moment when their carefully constructed lie would be tested against the scrutiny of a town that wanted nothing more than to find them wanting. "Mama, look!" Samuel pointed ahead, and Hannah's heart sank. A group of riders approached from the direction of town. Even from a distance, she recognized the heavy figure of Cyrus Blackwell at the lead. "Steady," Margaret murmured, her hands tight on the reins. "We expected this." The riders drew closer, and Hannah counted 5 men, Blackwell, Pastor Yates, and 3 others she recognized from church. Their faces were grim, purposeful. "Mrs. Cooper." Blackwell reined in his horse, blocking the road. His eyes swept over their wagon, lingering on Luke with undisguised suspicion. "We were just coming to see you." "Then you've saved us a trip, Mr. Blackwell." Hannah kept her voice steady, pleasant. "We were coming to town ourselves." "Were you now?" It wasn't a question. Blackwell's gaze fixed on Luke. "And who might this be?" This was it, the moment they'd prepared for, the lie they'd rehearsed. Hannah felt Luke tense behind her, felt Margaret's warning pressure on her arm. She took a breath and spoke the words that would either save them or damn them. "This is my cousin, Luke Morrison, from Missouri." She used his mother's maiden name deliberately, tying him to the fictional family tree they'd constructed. "He came west looking for work and got caught in the storm. We've been nursing him back to health." "Cousin," Blackwell's tone dripped skepticism. "Funny, I don't recall you ever mentioning family in Missouri." "Third cousin," Margaret interjected smoothly, "connected through my late mother's family. Hannah's grandmother and Luke's great-grandmother were sisters. It's a distant relation, but family nonetheless." One of the other men, a farmer named Jensen, leaned forward in his saddle. "If he's family, why didn't he go straight to your place? Why hide in the barn like a criminal?" Luke spoke for the first time, his voice carefully controlled. "I didn't hide, sir. I was traveling in the storm, trying to reach my cousin's farm, when my horse threw me. I must have lost consciousness. Mrs. Cooper found me half frozen in her barn." He paused, then added with just the right note of injured dignity, "As for why I didn't go straight there, I was operating on old information. I thought the farm was closer to town. I was wrong." It was a good answer, plausible and proud. Hannah felt a flash of gratitude for Luke's quick thinking, but Blackwell wasn't satisfied. "Convenient story. You have any proof of this family connection?" "Do you have proof it's false?" Hannah shot back, her temper flaring. "We've explained Mr. Morrison's presence. We've done nothing wrong, and yet you ride out here like a posse, treating us like criminals. On what grounds, exactly?" Pastor Yates shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, Hannah, no one's accusing—" "Aren't they?" Hannah stood up in the wagon, and she felt every eye turn to her. "My husband died with his reputation in tatters, and you've been waiting ever since for me to fail, to prove that I'm as dishonorable as you believed him to be. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, gentlemen, but taking in an injured family member is not a sin. It's Christian charity, the very thing you claim to preach." Silence fell over the group. Several of the men had the grace to look ashamed. Even Blackwell seemed momentarily taken aback by her vehemence. "We're simply looking out for your welfare," he said finally, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "A woman alone with a strange man, a family member," Hannah corrected sharply. "And I'm not alone. I have my mother-in-law, my son, and now my cousin to help with the farm. We're managing quite well, thank you." Pastor Yates cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss this more calmly in town. Mr. Morrison, you said? You must be eager to meet the community, find work if you're planning to stay in the area." It was an olive branch, carefully offered. Hannah glanced back at Luke, who gave a subtle nod. "That would be welcome, Pastor," he said. "I'm grateful for my cousin's hospitality, but I don't intend to impose. If there's work to be had, I'm a hard worker and an honest one." "We'll see about that," Blackwell muttered, but he moved his horse aside, allowing the wagon to pass. As they rolled forward, Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. They'd survived the first test, but she could feel Blackwell's eyes boring into their backs, could sense his determination to find fault, to prove his suspicions correct. "Well done," Margaret murmured so quietly only Hannah could hear. "But this is just the beginning." Hannah knew she was right. The real test would come in town, where gossip spread like wildfire, and every word, every glance would be examined for evidence of impropriety. They reached Cedar Falls just as the afternoon sun slanted across the main street. It was Saturday, which meant the town was busy. Farmers bringing produce to sell, women shopping at the general store, men gathered outside the saloon despite the early hour. As the wagon rolled past, conversation died in ripples, heads turning to stare at the unfamiliar man riding with the Cooper family. Hannah held her head high, refusing to show the fear that churned in her stomach. Beside her, Margaret did the same, her spine rigid with defiant pride. And behind them, Luke sat with Samuel, his expression carefully neutral, giving nothing away. They stopped outside the general store, and Hannah climbed down with as much dignity as she could muster. Several women stood on the boardwalk, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Among them was Mrs. Henshaw, the banker's wife and undisputed queen of Cedar Falls society. "Hannah Cooper," Mrs. Henshaw said, her voice carrying that particular tone of false sweetness that meant nothing good. "What a surprise to see you in town. And with a guest. Family, actually." Hannah forced a smile. "Mrs. Henshaw, may I introduce my cousin, Luke Morrison, from Missouri. Luke, this is Mrs. Henshaw." Luke had descended from the wagon and now removed his hat, offering a respectful nod. "Ma'am, pleased to make your acquaintance." Mrs. Henshaw's eyes narrowed, assessing him with the thoroughness of a horse trader examining potential stock. "Morrison? I wasn't aware Hannah had family in Missouri." "Third cousins," Hannah said smoothly. "Connected through my grandmother's family. Luke's come west looking for opportunities." "How enterprising." Mrs. Henshaw's gaze flickered to Hannah, and there was no mistaking the calculation in her eyes. "And he's staying with you?" "Until he finds work and lodging of his own, yes. He was taken ill during the storm. Exposure, you understand. We've been nursing him back to health." "How charitable of you." The words were honeyed poison. "Though one wonders at the propriety of a young widow housing an unmarried man, cousin or not." Heat flooded Hannah's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "One wonders why Christian charity should be questioned when it's exactly what the Bible commands us to practice." Before Mrs. Henshaw could respond, a new voice cut across the tension. "Hannah, is it true? You have family visiting?" Dr. Samuel Brennan pushed through the small crowd that had gathered, his weathered face creased with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. He was one of the few people in town who'd never turned his back on Hannah after Thomas's death, and she felt a rush of relief at his presence. "Dr. Brennan, yes, this is my cousin Luke Morrison." The doctor extended his hand, which Luke shook firmly. "Good to meet you, son. Morrison, you say? Any relation to the Morrisons who settled near Independence back in '49? Hannah's breath caught, but Luke didn't miss a beat. "Could be, sir. My great-grandfather moved through that area, though the family ended up further east eventually." "Fascinating. I knew some Morrisons back then. Good people, hard workers." Dr. Brennan clapped Luke on the shoulder. "You've got the look of them, the strong build, farmer stock, unless I miss my guess." "Yes, sir. Grew up working the land." "Well, you've come to the right place. Always need good workers out here, especially with spring planting coming up." The doctor turned to Hannah. "How's he recovered from the storm? I heard he was poorly." "Much better, thank you, though he still tires easily." Dr. Brennan nodded knowingly. "Exposure can take it out of a man. You did right, keeping him warm and rested. Another few weeks, and he'll be good as new." He paused, then added with a pointed look at Mrs. Henshaw and the other watching women. "Lucky thing he had family to take him in. Man could have died out there alone." The implicit rebuke hung in the air. Mrs. Henshaw's mouth tightened, but she couldn't argue with the doctor's logic without appearing heartless. "Yes, well," she said stiffly, "I suppose we should all be grateful for small mercies. Good day, Hannah, Mr. Morrison." She swept away, her entourage following like ducklings, but the damage was done. The story would be all over town by sundown. Hannah Cooper's mysterious cousin, the questionable propriety of the arrangement, the doctor's endorsement that provided just enough cover to make outright condemnation difficult. Dr. Brennan watched them go, then turned back to Hannah with a wry smile. Don't mind Constance Henshaw. She's got more opinions than sense and twice as much need to share them. Thank you, Hannah said quietly, for what you said. Just the truth. Family takes care of family, and there's no shame in that. He studied Luke more closely. Though I'll be honest, son, you've landed yourself in a complicated situation. This town has a long memory and a short supply of trust, especially when it comes to the Cooper family. Luke's expression didn't change, but Hannah saw something flicker in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, of just how deep the prejudice ran. I appreciate your honesty, Dr. Brennan, he said. I don't intend to cause trouble for my cousin. I'll find work, earn my keep, and prove myself by my actions. That's the spirit. In fact, the doctor rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I might know of something. Jim Peterson's been looking for help at his ranch, needs someone for the spring roundup. It's hard work, but it pays fair and he's a decent man. Doesn't put much stock in town gossip. Hope sparked in Hannah's chest. If Luke could find legitimate work, if he could establish himself as a contributing member of the community, it would go a long way towards silencing the critics. I'd be grateful for an introduction, Luke said. Come by my office Monday morning. I'll write you a letter of introduction. Dr. Brennan tipped his hat to Hannah. And you, my dear, keep your chin up. You've done nothing wrong, and don't let anyone tell you different. As the doctor walked away, Hannah felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. It wasn't much, one ally in a town full of skeptics, but it was something. He's a good man, Margaret said, coming to stand beside them. Samuel clung to her skirts, his eyes wide at all the attention they were drawing. One of the few. We need to finish our shopping and get home, Hannah said. She could feel eyes on them from every direction, could almost hear the whispers starting up now that the initial confrontation had passed. Luke, stay close. And remember, I know we're cousins. Nothing more. But as his eyes met hers, Hannah felt that same dangerous warmth from before, that pull she couldn't quite name or explain. They weren't cousins, and they both knew it. They were strangers bound together by circumstance and necessity, playing roles that felt increasingly uncomfortable the longer they maintained them. Inside the general store, Mr. Patterson greeted them with professional courtesy that didn't quite hide his curiosity. Hannah made her purchases quickly, flour, sugar, the few supplies they could afford, while Luke stood near the door, his presence drawing stares from other customers. Your cousin seems like a capable young man, Mr. Patterson said as he wrapped Hannah's purchases. Though I have to say, I was surprised to hear you had family out this way. Life is full of surprises, Hannah replied evenly. Indeed it is. The storekeeper's eyes drifted to Luke, then back to Hannah. You know, folks are going to talk. Already are, if I'm being honest. Let them talk. We've done nothing to be ashamed of. I'm not saying you have. Just be careful, Hannah. This town hasn't been kind to you since Thomas passed. Don't give them more ammunition. It was perhaps the most sympathetic version of the warning she'd received all day. Hannah nodded her thanks and took her packages, eager to escape the scrutiny. Outside, they found Pastor Yates waiting by the wagon, his expression troubled. Hannah, might I have a word? Privately? Hannah glanced at Margaret, who took the packages and began loading them into the wagon. Luke moved to help her, giving Hannah space. Of course, Pastor. They walked a few paces away, just far enough for privacy but still within view of the others. Pastor Yates removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a nervous gesture Hannah had seen before. I want to help you, he said without preamble. I believe you when you say, Mr. Morrison is your cousin. Dr. Brennan's endorsement carries weight, and I see no reason to doubt your word. But, Hannah could hear it coming. But Cyrus Blackwell and others on the church board are not so easily convinced. They see impropriety in the arrangement, regardless of blood relation. And I'm afraid, he paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase it. I'm afraid they're preparing to take action. Hannah's blood ran cold. What kind of action? They want to call a meeting of the board to discuss your situation. There's talk of requiring that Mr. Morrison find other lodging immediately, or else... He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Or else what? Hannah pressed, though she already knew the answer. Or else they'll petition to have Samuel removed from your care. They'll argue that you're providing an immoral environment for a child, that you're unfit. He held up a hand as Hannah's face went white. I don't agree with them, Hannah. I'll fight this with everything I have. But you need to know what you're facing. The world seemed to tilt beneath Hannah's feet. Take Samuel? They couldn't. They wouldn't dare. But even as the thought formed, she knew they could. Knew they would, if given the slightest justification. The law gave church elders tremendous power over matters of morality and family welfare. A widow deemed unfit could lose her child with nothing more than a board vote and a judge's signature. When? Her voice came out steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. When is this meeting? Next Friday, a week from today. They'll want to interview you, question Mr. Morrison, examine the propriety of the arrangement. Pastor Yates looked at her with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry, Hannah. I tried to talk them out of it, but Blackwell has his mind set. Of course he does. Bitterness crept into her tone. He's been looking for an excuse to punish me ever since Thomas died, and now I've handed him one. You've done nothing wrong. That won't matter, and you know it. Hannah straightened her shoulders, fighting down the fear. Thank you for warning me, Pastor. I appreciate your honesty. There might be a way to satisfy them, he said carefully. If Mr. Morrison were to find lodging elsewhere, or if you were to... He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion he was about to make. If I were to what? Send my cousin away while he's still recovering? Prove to the board that I value their opinion more than family loyalty? Hannah shook her head. No, I won't do it. If they want to judge me, let them. But I won't compromise my principles to make them comfortable. Pastor Yates sighed. I admire your conviction, Hannah. Truly, I do. But conviction won't protect Samuel if the board decides to act. The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. All her pride, all her determination to stand up to the town's judgment, none of it would matter if they took her son. I'll be at the meeting, she said quietly. Luke and I both will. We'll answer their questions, and we'll prove that there's nothing improper in our arrangement. I hope you can. The pastor replaced his hat, his face lined with worry. I truly do. But prepare yourself, Hannah. They won't make it easy. As he walked away, Hannah stood alone on the boardwalk, watching the town move around her with a new awareness of how fragile her position really was. She'd thought she could face their judgment, could stand strong against their whispers and suspicions. But she hadn't anticipated this, the very real threat of losing the one thing that mattered most. Mama? Samuel's voice pulled her back to the present. He stood beside the wagon, his small face creased with worry. Are you all right? Hannah forced a smile and went to him, kneeling to pull him into her arms. I'm fine, sweetheart, just talking with Pastor Yates. He looked sad. Sometimes grown-ups have difficult things to discuss. But it's nothing for you to worry about. Samuel hugged her tight, and Hannah closed her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and sunshine and the faint smell of the barn that no amount of washing could completely remove. This was what mattered. This was what she was fighting for. When she opened her eyes, she found Luke watching her with an expression that made her heart ache. He knew. Somehow, he'd figured out that something was wrong, and the guilt in his eyes was almost more than she could bear. We should go home, Margaret said quietly, and there was a weight to the words that suggested she too had guessed at the pastor's warning. The ride back to the farm was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Hannah stared at the horizon, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. A week ago, her biggest worry had been getting through the winter with enough food and firewood. Now she faced the possibility of losing her son because she'd chosen to save a stranger's life. No, not a stranger anymore. Luke Maddox had become something else in the weeks since she'd found him dying in her barn. An ally. A friend. And perhaps, if she was honest with herself, something more complicated and dangerous than either of those things. When they reached the farm, Luke helped Margaret and Samuel unload the wagon, while Hannah stood in the yard, staring at the house that had been her home for 8 years. Thomas had brought her here as a bride, full of dreams about the life they'd build together. Those dreams had died with him, replaced by the harsh reality of survival. But she'd survived. Through grief and gossip and the grinding poverty that came with being a widow, she'd kept going. She'd kept her son fed and clothed, kept the farm running, kept her dignity intact even when the town tried to strip it away. She wouldn't stop now. "Hannah," Luke's voice came from behind her, low and urgent. "What did the pastor say?" She turned to face him, and in the fading light she could see every line of worry etched into his features. "They're calling a meeting," she said simply. "The church board, to discuss the impropriety of our arrangement." Luke's jaw clenched. "When?" "Next Friday." "Then I'll leave, tonight. I can be gone before—" "No!" The word came out fierce, final. "We're past that point, Luke. You leaving now would only confirm their suspicions, make everything worse. We have to see this through." "But if they take Samuel, they won't." Hannah spoke with more confidence than she felt. "We'll go to that meeting, we'll answer their questions, and we'll make them see that we've done nothing wrong. And if they don't see it, if they decide to take him anyway?" Hannah met his gaze squarely. "Then we'll fight. With everything we have, we'll fight." For a long moment they stood there in the gathering dusk, the weight of what they faced settling over them like snow. Then Luke nodded once, a gesture of solidarity and determination. "All right," he said. "We fight." Margaret appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. "Supper's ready," she called. "Come inside before you both freeze." But neither of them moved immediately. Hannah looked at Luke, really looked at him, and saw not the dying stranger she'd saved, but a man who'd become tangled in her life in ways neither of them had anticipated. A man who'd offered to leave to protect her, who'd stood beside her against the town's judgment, who looked at her son with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Luke," she said quietly, "that story you told, about why you were shot, was it true?" He held her gaze, and she saw the answer before he spoke. "No." Hannah's breath caught. "What really happened?" "I was running from men I owed money to, men who wanted me dead for debts I couldn't pay." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I gambled, Hannah, lost everything I had, and then some. When I couldn't pay up, they came for me. I ran, and they shot me, and I kept running until I couldn't anymore." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Hannah should have been angry. He'd lied to her, put her family at risk for his own mistakes. But instead she felt only a strange sort of understanding. They were all running from something, weren't they? From the past, from judgment, from the weight of their own failures. "Why tell me now?" she asked. "Because you deserve the truth. Because if we're going to face the church board together, you need to know exactly who you're defending." He paused, then added quietly, "And because I'm tired of lying to you." Hannah absorbed this, thinking about all the half-truths and careful evasions that had become the foundation of their arrangement. The fictional family connection, the invented history, the story they'd so carefully constructed. "The men you owed money to," she said finally. "Are they still looking for you?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." Luke's shoulders sagged slightly. "I've been trying to convince myself they think I'm dead, that I'm safe here. But the truth is, I don't know. And that makes me a liability to you and your family." "Everything makes us a liability in this town," Hannah said with a bitter laugh. "At least with you, I chose the risk." "You didn't know. I knew enough. I knew you were dangerous, that taking you in could cause trouble. I did it anyway." She stepped closer to him, driven by something she didn't fully understand. "I'm not sorry, Luke. Not for saving you, not for keeping you here, not for any of it." His eyes searched her face, and in them, she saw wonder and confusion, and something that looked dangerously like the feeling taking root in her own chest. "You should be," he said roughly. "You should send me away. Protect yourself and Samuel. That's what a smart woman would do." "Then I suppose I'm not very smart." "Hannah, Mama, Uncle Luke, Grandma says supper's getting cold." Samuel's voice rang out from the house, impatient and unconcerned with adult complications. The moment broke. Hannah stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing, how easy it would be to close that distance entirely. Dangerous thoughts, dangerous feelings. "We should go in," she said. "Yeah," but neither of them moved immediately, both caught in the gravity of what had just passed between them, truth spoken, lies acknowledged, and beneath it all the growing awareness that what they felt for each other had moved beyond gratitude or friendship into territory that could destroy them both. Inside, the kitchen was warm and bright. Margaret had set the table, and Samuel chattered excitedly about something he'd seen in town: a dog doing tricks, a wagon full of colorful fabric, the small wonders that captured a child's imagination. Hannah let his voice wash over her, grateful for the normalcy of it, the reminder that life continued despite everything. Luke sat across from her, and their eyes met over the simple meal of stew and bread. In his gaze, she saw an echo of her own thoughts, the knowledge that they were standing on the edge of something they couldn't take back, that every day he stayed made it harder to imagine him leaving, and the terrifying realization that she didn't want him to leave at all. After supper, while Margaret put Samuel to bed, Hannah and Luke sat by the fire in a silence that felt different from before, more weighted, more aware. "I meant what I said earlier," Luke spoke finally, his voice low, "about being tired of lying to you. So I'll tell you one more truth." Hannah's heart quickened. "What?" He turned to look at her, and the firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look both vulnerable and dangerous. "I came to your barn to die," he said. "When I was shot, when I was bleeding out in the snow, I wasn't trying to find shelter. I was just done. Done running, done fighting, done carrying the weight of all my mistakes. I wanted it to be over." Hannah's throat tightened. "Luke, but then I woke up, and you were there, cleaning my wound with hands that shook but didn't stop. And Samuel brought me water. And Margaret, stern, suspicious Margaret, made broth and spooned it into my mouth when I couldn't feed myself." He paused, his eyes intense on hers. "You gave me a reason to live when I'd lost all of my own. And now I don't know how to leave. Don't know if I can." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Hannah knew she should say something practical, something that acknowledged the impossibility of their situation. But instead, she heard herself say, "Then don't." "Hannah, we both know I can't stay. Not really. Even if the church board doesn't force the issue, even if we somehow convince them, I'm still a man with debts and enemies, still someone whose past could catch up with him any day. You deserve better than that. Samuel deserves better." "Don't tell me what I deserve," Hannah's voice was fierce. "And don't presume to know what's best for my son. He's happy, Luke, happier than he's been since Thomas died. He follows you around like you hung the moon, and when you're not here, he talks about you constantly. You think I don't see that? You think I don't know what it would do to him if you left? Better a clean break now than what? Than letting him get more attached? It's already too late for that." Her voice cracked slightly. "It's too late for all of us." Luke stared at her, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. The realization that she wasn't just talking about Samuel's attachment, that somewhere in the past weeks, in the careful dance of propriety and the shared burden of their secret, she'd come to care for him in a way that had nothing to do with Christian charity or family obligation. "Hannah," he breathed, and her name on his lips sounded like prayer and curse combined. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's impossible. I know all the reasons it can't work, but that doesn't change how I feel." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Luke stood abruptly, crossing to the window, putting distance between them. "This is exactly what we can't do," he said, his voice strained. "This is what they're looking for, proof that there's something improper between us. If they even suspect, they already suspect. Then we can't give them evidence." He turned to face her, and the anguish in his expression mirrored her own. "Don't you understand? Every feeling we have, every moment like this, it puts you and Samuel in danger. The church board is looking for any excuse to take him from you, and if they find out that we—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "That we what?" Hannah stood, facing him across the room. "That we care for each other? That somewhere between saving your life and lying to protect you, I started to feel something I have no right to feel?" "Hannah, please, I'm not asking you for anything, Luke. I'm not expecting promises or declarations. I needed you to know. Before the meeting, before whatever comes next, you needed to know that you matter. To me, to Samuel, to this family. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. And if that makes me foolish, if that's the final proof that I'm as morally corrupt as they all think, then so be it. Luke stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, and she could see the war playing out across his features. Want and duty, desire and honor, the pull between what he felt and what he knew was right. "You're not foolish," he said finally, roughly. "You're the bravest, most incredible woman I've ever met, and that's exactly why we can't." He stopped, shaking his head. "This has to be enough. Working together, protecting each other, getting through this mess, it has to be." Hannah nodded, even though her heart was breaking. "You're right. Of course you're right." "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," Luke said abruptly. "And from now until the meeting, we maintain absolute propriety. No more conversations alone, no more moments like this. We give them nothing to use against us." "Luke, it's the only way, Hannah. You know it is." She did know it. Knew that every minute they spent alone, every charged glance and unspoken word was ammunition for their enemies. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. "All right," she agreed quietly. "The barn." Luke gathered his bedroll with quick, efficient movements, not looking at her. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said, his back still to her, "I feel it too. Everything you said. I feel it too." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty room. Hannah stood alone by the fire, listening to his footsteps fade toward the barn, and allowed herself one moment of weakness. One moment to acknowledge the depth of what she felt, the impossibility of what she wanted, and the bitter truth that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking your own heart. Tomorrow, they would resume their careful performance. Cousins, nothing more. Allies in a fight for survival, maintaining the precise distance that propriety demanded. But tonight, in the privacy of her own thoughts, she could admit the truth. She loved him, and that love, beautiful and terrible and completely forbidden, might be the very thing that destroyed them all. The week that followed passed in a strange sort of agony, each day bringing them closer to Friday's reckoning while the careful distance Luke had imposed stretched between them like barbed wire. Necessary, painful, and impossible to cross without drawing blood. True to his word, Luke slept in the barn. Hannah watched from the kitchen window each night as lamplight flickered in the loft where he'd made his bed among the hay bales, and her chest ached with the wrongness of it. They'd nursed him back from death's door only to send him to sleep in the cold because propriety demanded it, because the town's judgment mattered more than basic human kindness. But she understood the necessity. Every morning when she woke, she reminded herself that this distance was protection, that maintaining it might be the only thing standing between her and losing Samuel forever. Monday morning brought Dr. Brennan's promised letter of introduction. Luke rode into town alone, despite Hannah's offer to accompany him, and returned 3 hours later with news that transformed the careful tension in the household into something approaching hope. "Jim Peterson hired me," he announced, standing in the kitchen doorway with snow dusting his shoulders and something like pride in his voice. "Wants me to start tomorrow, helping prepare for spring roundup. The pay's fair, and he's offered me a bunk in the ranch hands' quarters once I'm strong enough for full days." Margaret looked up from her mending, her expression cautiously optimistic. "That's good news. Honest work, honest wages. It'll help at the board meeting." "That's what Dr. Brennan said." Luke brushed snow from his coat. "He told Peterson about my situation, about the questions folks are asking. Peterson didn't seem to care, said a man's entitled to visit family without the whole town treating it like a scandal." Hannah felt something loosen in her chest. "He sounds like a decent man." "He is. Reminds me of my father, actually. Direct, fair, doesn't suffer fools." Luke's eyes met Hannah's briefly before sliding away, maintaining the careful distance they'd agreed upon. "He said if the board gives us trouble, he'll speak on my behalf, testify that I'm a good worker, that he trusts me." "Every ally helps," Margaret said, "though I suspect Cyrus Blackwell won't be swayed by Jim Peterson's opinion any more than he was by Dr. Brennan's." "No," Hannah agreed quietly, "but it builds a case. Shows that Luke is exactly what we've claimed, a family member looking for honest work, nothing more." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, because they were both truth and lie tangled together. Luke was looking for honest work, would be a good employee, would prove himself through his labor. But he wasn't just family passing through. He was the man who'd somehow become essential to the rhythm of their days, whose absence from the house created a hollow space that no amount of propriety could fill. Samuel burst through the door then, cheeks flushed from playing in the snow, and launched himself at Luke with the uncomplicated affection of childhood. "Uncle Luke, did you get the job? Are you going to be a real cowboy?" Luke caught him, steadying the boy with hands that were gentle despite their size. "I got the job, yes, but I've been a real cowboy for years, Samuel. This is just more of the same." "Will you teach me? How to rope and ride and everything?" Something flickered across Luke's face, pleasure and pain combined. "If your mama says it's all right, when I have time off from the ranch, maybe I can show you a few things." Samuel turned pleading eyes to Hannah. "Please, Mama, please." Hannah looked at her son's eager face, at Luke's carefully neutral expression that didn't quite hide the longing beneath it, and felt her heart crack a little wider. Every promise made, every moment of connection between Luke and Samuel would make the eventual goodbye that much harder. But how could she deny her child this joy? How could she steal these moments from either of them? "We'll see," she said, the eternal parent's answer that promised nothing and everything. But first, Luke needs to prove himself at Mr. Peterson's ranch, and we all need to get through Friday. The reminder of the looming board meeting sobered everyone. Samuel's excitement dimmed slightly, though he didn't fully understand the stakes. Luke's expression shuddered. Margaret's hand stilled on her mending. "5 more days," Margaret said quietly. 5 days to make sure our story is airtight, that we have answers for every question they might ask. They spent the evening drilling the details again, even though they all knew the story by heart. Luke's fictional journey west, the storm that had caught him unawares, the fortunate coincidence of stumbling to his cousin's barn. They practiced answers to hostile questions, anticipated the ways Blackwell might try to trap them in contradictions. "What if they ask about my wound?" Luke said at one point. "If Blackwell demands I show them, prove it was a hunting accident and not something more sinister." "Refuse," Hannah said firmly. "Tell them it's a private matter, that your body is your own business. They can't force you to disrobe." "Can't they?" Luke's voice was skeptical. "If they claim it's necessary to determine the truth, then we remind them that bodily modesty is also a Christian virtue," Margaret interjected. "That demanding a man strip for their inspection is itself improper. Pastor Yates will back us on that, I think. He's uncomfortable with this whole business." It was a thin defense, but it was all they had. The scar from the gunshot would tell its own story to anyone who knew wounds, and that story would contradict everything they'd claimed. When the evening grew late and Samuel had been sent to bed, Hannah walked Luke out to the barn, as had become their careful habit. They maintained a proper distance, never touching, always aware of the possibility of watching eyes, even in the darkness. "You did well today," Hannah said as they stood outside the barn door. "Getting the job, I mean. It's exactly what we needed." "I hope it's enough." Luke's breath misted in the cold air. "Peterson's a good man, but his endorsement won't erase Blackwell's suspicions." "No, but it gives us something to stand on. Proof that you're not just taking advantage of our hospitality, that you're contributing, building a life here. A life built on lies." His voice was rough. "Does that ever bother you, Hannah? How easily we've learned to deceive." She considered the question, wrapping her shawl tighter against the wind. "I think we're deceiving less than you believe. The story about your arrival might be false, but the rest, your character, your intentions, the kind of man you are, that's all true. We're just presenting it in a way the town can accept." Pretty words for ugly necessity. "Maybe, but sometimes pretty words are all we have." Hannah paused, then added quietly, "I saw you with Samuel today, the way you were with him. That wasn't pretense, was it?" Luke's jaw tightened. "No. That boy, he deserves better than a man like me getting attached to him." "Why? Because of your past? Because you made mistakes?" Hannah's voice gained strength. "We've all made mistakes, Luke. Thomas certainly did, and I loved him anyway. That's what family does. We see the whole person, not just their failings." "We're not really family," Luke said, but there was less conviction in it than before. Aren't we? Family is more than blood, isn't it? It's choosing to stand by someone when it would be easier to walk away. It's caring even when it costs you. She met his eyes in the moonlight. By that measure, we became family the night I pulled a bullet from your side. For a moment, she thought he might close the distance between them, might break the rules they'd so carefully established. But instead, he stepped back, putting even more space between them. Get some sleep, Hannah. We both need to be sharp for the week ahead. You too. And Luke? She waited until he looked at her. Thank you. For getting the job, for trying so hard to make this work. It matters. He nodded once, then disappeared into the barn. Hannah stood in the cold for a long moment, staring at the closed door before finally turning back to the house. Inside, Margaret waited by the dying fire, her face drawn with worry. You're playing a dangerous game, she said without preamble. Hannah didn't pretend to misunderstand. I know. Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're falling in love with that man, and if I can see it, others will too. The words hit like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Hannah sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. What do you want me to say, Mother Margaret? That I can control how I feel? That I can simply decide to stop caring about him? I want you to think about Samuel. Margaret's voice softened slightly. Most women. Luke has been kind, helpful, good with Samuel. It's natural to feel drawn to him. Natural, Hannah repeated hollowly, but inappropriate, scandalous, sinful, according to the town. According to the town, breathing wrong is sinful when you're a Cooper. Margaret's tone turned bitter. They've been waiting for you to fall, to prove that Thomas's supposed crimes were family traits. This situation with Luke, it's exactly what they've been hoping for. Hannah pressed her palms to her eyes, fighting back tears she couldn't afford to shed. So what do I do? Even if Luke leaves after the board meeting, even if he goes to live at Peterson's ranch, the damage is done. They'll always suspect, always wonder, and every kind word, every interaction will be examined for evidence of impropriety. Then we give them a different story. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. One they can accept. What do you mean? I mean, we turn their suspicions into something respectable. If the board is concerned about propriety, about an unmarried man living with a widow, she paused significantly, then perhaps that man shouldn't remain unmarried. Hannah's breath caught. You're suggesting... I'm suggesting that if you and Luke were engaged, properly courting with intentions toward marriage, then suddenly all their concerns become moot. A betrothed couple maintaining separate sleeping quarters until the wedding, that's not scandalous. That's admirably restrained. The idea was so audacious that Hannah couldn't immediately process it. Mother Margaret, we can't just announce an engagement. It's a solution, Margaret said firmly. Think about it, Hannah. Luke's already established himself as your cousin, though distantly related enough that marriage wouldn't be improper. He has a job now, income, respectability. If he were courting you with honorable intentions, the board would have no grounds for complaint. Except it would be another lie. We're not really courting. We're not... Hannah stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. Margaret's eyes were sharp. Aren't you? Not in the formal sense, perhaps, but there's clearly something between you. Why not make it official? Give it a framework the town can accept. Because Luke would never agree to it. Because I can't ask him to tie himself to me out of obligation, to solve a problem I created by saving his life. Hannah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. And because if we pretend to be engaged and then don't follow through with marriage, it makes everything worse. Who says you'd be pretending? Margaret's voice was gentle now. Hannah, I may be old, but I'm not blind. That man cares for you. Maybe he hasn't said it in so many words, but it's there in everything he does. The way he looks after Samuel, the way he's willing to sleep in a freezing barn to protect your reputation, the way his whole face changes when you walk into a room. Hannah pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the window. Even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, there's too much we don't know about him. His past, the men he owes money to, whether he'll even stay once the board meeting is over. I can't build a future on that kind of uncertainty. Life is uncertainty, child. I married Margaret's father not knowing if the farm would survive, if we'd have children, if we'd live to see old age. We chose to build something together anyway. Margaret stood, moving to Hannah's side. I'm not saying you should rush into anything. But if the board meeting goes badly, if they push for Luke to leave or threaten to take Samuel, this could be an option, a way to make your feelings work for you instead of against you. Hannah turned to face her mother-in-law, seeing not just worry but a kind of hope in the older woman's eyes. You like him, she said, surprised. After everything, your warnings, your suspicions, you actually like him. I respect him, Margaret corrected. He's made mistakes, yes, but he's trying to do right by us, even when it costs him. That's worth something. She paused, then added quietly, and I want you to be happy, Hannah. Thomas would want that too. You've grieved long enough. The mention of Thomas sent a pang through Hannah's chest. She'd loved her husband, mourned him deeply, and even now carried the weight of his tarnished reputation. But the grief had dulled over the months, and in its place had grown something new, the possibility of a different kind of future. I don't know if I can do this, Hannah whispered. Any of it. The board meeting, the lies, the feelings I'm not supposed to have. You've already survived the impossible, Margaret said. Widowhood, poverty, the town's judgment. You'll survive this too. And Hannah? She squeezed Hannah's hand. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Just think about it. About what you want. Not just what's safe or proper, or what others expect. Think about what would make you happy. That night, lying in the loft with Samuel's soft breathing beside her, Hannah did think about it. She imagined Luke not as a temporary guest or a dangerous complication, but as a permanent presence in their lives. Sitting at their table not as cousin, but as husband, teaching Samuel to rope and ride as a father would, building a life with them that wasn't founded on necessity, but on choice. The image was so vivid, so achingly real, that tears slipped down her cheeks, because she wanted it. God help her, she wanted it with an intensity that terrified her. But wanting and having were two different things, separated by a chasm of obstacles. The board meeting, Luke's uncertain past, the debts that might come calling, the town's judgment that could crush them all. She fell asleep with no answers, only the knowledge that in 5 days everything would change one way or another. Tuesday dawned cold and clear. Luke left for Peterson's ranch before sunrise, and Hannah threw herself into farm work with a determination that bordered on desperation. If she kept moving, kept busy, maybe she wouldn't have time to think about Margaret's suggestion or the way her heart had leaped at the possibility. Samuel helped her feed the chickens and collect eggs, chattering about school starting up again next week, and whether Luke might teach him to whittle like Pa used to do. Each mention of Luke was a small knife to Hannah's heart, a reminder of how deeply her son had bonded with a man who might disappear from their lives as suddenly as he'd entered them. Mama? Samuel's voice pulled her from dark thoughts. Why are you crying? Hannah touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. Just the cold, sweetheart. Makes my eyes water. Oh. He accepted this with a child's easy trust. Can we make cookies? Uncle Luke likes the ones with molasses. Maybe tomorrow, Hannah promised, though she had no idea if there would be a tomorrow that included making cookies for Luke, or if Friday would shatter everything they'd built. Margaret spent the day in town, strategically visiting with church members who might be sympathetic to their cause. She returned as dusk fell, her face grim. The talk is worse than I feared, she reported, removing her shawl and warming her hands by the stove. Blackwell's been making the rounds, dropping hints about moral corruption and improper arrangements. He's got half the congregation convinced you're living in sin. Hannah's stomach dropped. What about Pastor Yates, the people who've supported us? They're trying, but they're outnumbered. Mrs. Patterson from the general store spoke up for you, said she saw nothing but proper cousin behavior when you were in the store. Dr. Brennan's been vocal about Luke's good character, but Blackwell is influential and he's determined. Determined to what? Ruin us completely? Margaret hesitated before answering. I think he wants Luke gone, yes. But more than that, I think he wants to make an example of you, Hannah, to show the town what happens when widows don't stay in their proper place, don't accept the church's guidance. My proper place, Hannah repeated bitterly, which would be what? Destitute? Remarried to some man of the board's choosing? Or perhaps locked away in an asylum for the sin of independence? Don't joke about such things. Margaret's voice was sharp with fear. They have that power, Hannah. The church board can declare a woman mentally unfit, especially a widow without male protection. It's rare, but it happens. The word sent ice through Hannah's veins. She'd known the board could take Samuel, but she hadn't considered that they might come after her directly, might use her very competence and self-sufficiency as evidence of instability. Then we need to be perfect on Friday, she said, forcing steel into her voice. No mistakes, no contradictions, nothing they can use against us. Hannah, I need to tell you something else. Margaret's tone made Hannah's breath catch. There's a rumor going around that Blackwell has hired an investigator, someone to look into Luke's past, verify his story about Missouri and the Morrison family connection. An investigator? Hannah's mind raced. But that would take weeks, wouldn't it? To send letters, get responses? Unless he uses the telegraph. Blackwell has money, Hannah. If he's determined to expose Luke as a fraud, she didn't need to finish the sentence. If Blackwell found proof that Luke wasn't really Hannah's cousin, that their entire story was fabricated, then everything would collapse. The board wouldn't just separate them. They'd prosecute them for fraud, for corrupting a minor with their lies, for whatever charges could be drummed up to justify the harshest punishment. We need to tell Luke, Hannah said. He needs to know what he's facing. But Luke didn't return from Peterson's ranch until well after dark, exhausted from a full day's work. Hannah met him at the barn with a lantern, her stomach churning with anxiety. How was it? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Good. Hard work, but honest. Peterson's pleased with me. Luke's smile faded as he took in her expression. What's wrong? Hannah told him about Blackwell's investigator, watching his face grow increasingly grave as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at the hay-strewn floor. Then it's over, he said finally. Even if the investigator doesn't find anything before Friday, he will eventually. There's no Morrison family connection in Missouri, no cousin relationship. And when Blackwell proves it, he looked at her with anguish in his eyes. Hannah, I've destroyed you. No. She stepped closer, forgetting propriety in her urgency. You haven't destroyed anything. We knew this was a risk. A risk you took for me. A risk that's going to cost you your son. His hands clenched into fists. I have to leave, tonight. If I'm gone, if you can claim I deceived you, that you didn't know I was lying, that won't work and you know it. They'll say I was complicit, that I helped you deceive them. My leaving changes nothing except that you'd be out there alone, vulnerable to whoever might be looking for you. Better that than watching them take Samuel from you because of my mistakes. Hannah grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me, Luke Maddox. We still have options. Margaret suggested something today, something that might change everything. She told him about the engagement idea, watching emotions flicker across his face, surprise, longing, fear, and something that might have been hope. A fake engagement, he said slowly when she finished, to make our arrangement respectable. It wouldn't have to be fake. The words escaped before Hannah could stop them. I mean, we could, if you wanted. She stumbled over the suggestion, heat flooding her face. Luke stared at her. Hannah, are you saying? I'm saying that if we're going to lie anyway, if we're already risking everything, then maybe we should risk it for something real, something that could actually give us a future. She took a shaky breath. I have feelings for you, Luke. Real ones. And I hope, you might feel the same way. So why not make it official? Why not court properly? Get engaged and eventually marry if that's where it leads. Because I'm not free to marry, Luke said roughly. I have debts, Hannah. Men who'll come looking eventually. And my past. There are things you don't know, things that could endanger you and Samuel. Then tell me. Right now, tell me everything, and let me decide if it's too much to bear. Luke pulled away from her, pacing the length of the barn like a caged animal. You want the truth? Fine. I wasn't just gambling, Hannah. I was cheating, running rigged card games with a partner, fleecing miners and railroad workers of their wages. We made good money until we got caught, until my partner disappeared with the cash and left me holding the bag for debts we'd racked up all over the territory. Hannah absorbed this, her heart sinking even as she tried to keep her expression neutral. What else? I've done things I'm not proud of, hurt people who didn't deserve it. There was a woman in Denver, Sarah actually, though not my sister like I implied. She thought we were going to marry, and I let her believe it while I was using her father's business connections to set up our card games. When everything fell apart, when I had to run, I didn't even say goodbye. Each confession hit like a blow, painting a picture of a man who'd lived by deception and selfishness. But Hannah forced herself to listen, to hear not just the sins but the shame beneath them. Is that everything? She asked when he fell silent. Isn't that enough? Luke's voice was ragged. I'm not the honorable man you thought I was, Hannah. I'm a con artist, a coward, someone who spent years taking the easy path regardless of who it hurt. You should want nothing to do with me. You're right, Hannah said quietly. That's who you were. But is that who you are now? Luke's head snapped up. What? You've been here for weeks, Luke. I've seen how you are with Samuel, patient, kind, genuinely interested in teaching him. I've seen you work yourself to exhaustion at Peterson's ranch, rather than take advantage of our hospitality. I've watched you sleep in a freezing barn to protect my reputation, even though it makes no sense given your comfort. She stepped closer to him. The man you're describing sounds like someone who was lost, who made terrible choices. But the man I know, the one who's been living here, he's trying to do better, trying to be better. Trying isn't enough. It's everything. Hannah's voice gained strength. Do you think I'm perfect? I've lied to the entire town, fabricated a family history, coached my son to deceive church elders. I'm risking Samuel's welfare for a man I barely know because I'm too stubborn to bow to their judgment. By their standards, I'm as corrupt as you are. That's different, is it? Or are we both just people who've made mistakes, who are trying to survive in a world that offers precious few second chances? She reached out, taking his hand before he could pull away. I'm not asking you to be perfect, Luke. I'm asking if you're willing to try. To build something real with us, to face whatever comes together instead of running again. Luke stared at their joined hands, his jaw working. The debts are real, Hannah. The men I owe, they're not the forgiving type. If they find me, if they come here, then we'll face them, together. And if Blackwell's investigator exposes our lie about being cousins, then we tell the truth. That you were a stranger I helped, that we fell in love, that we're planning to marry. It's not the story they want, but it's honest. And maybe, just maybe, that will count for something. You're gambling everything on a maybe, Luke said, but his hand tightened on hers. So are you. Every day you stay, every choice you make to keep trying instead of running, it's all a gamble. Hannah moved closer until they were nearly touching. I'm not afraid of risk, Luke. I'm afraid of regret. Of wondering what could have been if we'd been brave enough to reach for it. For a long moment, they stood in the lamplight, the barn silent around them except for the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. Hannah could see the war in Luke's eyes, the pull between fear and hope, between the safety of isolation and the terrifying vulnerability of connection. If we do this, he said finally, slowly, if we announce an engagement at the board meeting, there's no taking it back. We'd have to follow through, have to actually marry eventually, or it makes everything worse. I know. And you're willing to marry me, knowing what you know, knowing what I've done? Hannah thought of Thomas, of the love they'd shared and the way it had been tainted by scandal and suspicion. She thought of the lonely months since his death, the grinding struggle to survive, the way she'd closed herself off from any possibility of joy or connection. And then she thought of Luke, scarred, imperfect, trying so desperately to be worthy of a second chance. She thought of how he made Samuel laugh, how he'd been willing to leave to protect them, how his presence had somehow transformed their struggling household into something that felt almost like a family again. Yes, she said simply. I'm willing. The question is, are you? Luke lifted his free hand, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you. Probably not, Hannah agreed, a hint of humor breaking through the tension. But I'm offering anyway. What do you say, Luke Maddox? Will you take a chance on us? He searched her face for a long moment, and she could see the exact instant when he made his decision. When fear gave way to something stronger, when the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. Yes, he whispered. God help me. Yes. Then he was kissing her, and Hannah's world narrowed to the warmth of his mouth on hers, the strength of his arms pulling her close, the rightness of it that defied every logical objection her mind could muster. It wasn't proper, wasn't cautious, wasn't any of the things they'd been trying so hard to maintain, but it was real. Finally, devastatingly real. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. The board meeting, he said. We tell them we're engaged? We tell them we're engaged, Hannah confirmed, and we dare them to object. A laugh escaped him, slightly wild. They're going to lose their minds. Probably. But at least they'll have to acknowledge that our intentions are honorable, that we're following a proper courtship path toward marriage. Nothing about this is proper, Hannah. No, she agreed, smiling against his shoulder. But it's ours, and that has to count for something. They stood there for a while longer, holding each other in the lamplight, before practical concerns reasserted themselves. Luke would still sleep in the barn. Even an engagement didn't excuse sharing quarters before marriage. They would still maintain careful propriety in public, though now it would be the propriety of a courting couple rather than distant relatives. And in 3 days they would face the church board together, armed with a truth that was both shield and sword. As Hannah walked back to the house, her lips still tingling from Luke's kiss, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the grim determination that had carried her through widowhood, but actual hope that the future might hold something better than mere survival. Margaret took one look at her face and knew immediately what had happened. You told him, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And? We're engaged. For real, not just for show. Hannah sank into a chair, the enormity of what she'd just agreed to finally hitting her. Margaret, what have I done? Her mother-in-law came to sit beside her, taking her hand. You've chosen to live instead of just existing. You've taken a chance on happiness, and for what it's worth, I think it's the right choice. Even knowing his past, the things he's done. Everyone has a past, Hannah. The question is whether they're willing to learn from it, to grow beyond it, and I think Luke is. Margaret squeezed her hand. Thomas would understand, you know. He'd want you to find love again, to give Samuel a father who's present and caring. He was many things, but he wasn't cruel. He wouldn't want you to grieve forever. The mention of Thomas brought tears to Hannah's eyes. I loved him. I know you did, and you can love Luke too. The heart's not a finite thing, child. It expands to hold what we need it to hold. That night, Hannah lay awake thinking about Friday, about standing before the board and announcing her engagement to a man she'd known for mere weeks. It was scandalous, impulsive, everything the town already believed her capable of. But it was also true. She loved Luke Maddox, with all his flaws and fears and desperate attempts at redemption. She loved the way he was with Samuel, the way he looked at her like she was something precious, the way he was willing to face his demons if it meant building a life with them. And love, Hannah decided in the darkness, was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, even if it meant defying the whole world to claim it. Wednesday and Thursday passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Luke worked at the ranch during the days and spent evenings with Hannah, Margaret, and Samuel, learning to be part of a family in ways that clearly both delighted and terrified him. They practiced their announcement for the board, refined their answers to anticipated questions, and tried to prepare for every possible outcome. Samuel, blessedly oblivious to the full stakes of Friday's meeting, was simply overjoyed at the idea of Luke becoming a permanent fixture in their lives. "Does this mean you'll be my new pa?" he asked Luke on Thursday evening, his eyes wide with hope. Luke glanced at Hannah before answering, and she saw the emotion he was trying to contain. "If that's all right with you, Samuel, I know I can't replace your father." "I know that," Samuel interrupted with the wisdom of a child who'd processed his grief in ways adults often couldn't. "Pa's gone, but you're here, and you make Mama smile again. That's good, right?" "Yeah, son," Luke said, his voice rough. "That's good." Hannah watched them together, her son and the man who'd somehow become essential to both their lives, and felt her conviction strengthen. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever the board decided, she wouldn't regret this choice. Wouldn't regret choosing love over fear, connection over safety. That night, as Luke headed to the barn, Hannah stopped him at the door. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. Saving you, keeping you here, falling in love with you, none of it." But Luke pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against her hair, "but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you've given me." "Just be yourself," Hannah said. "That's all I need. Just you, exactly as you are." Friday morning dawned cold and clear, as if the weather itself was holding its breath for what was to come. Hannah dressed carefully, in her best dress, the dark blue one she'd worn to Thomas's funeral, then changed her mind and chose the green one instead. This wasn't a funeral. It was a fight for her future, and she'd dress for battle. Margaret braided Hannah's hair with careful precision, and Samuel polished Luke's boots until they shone. They were preparing like soldiers before combat, each small task a ritual of readiness. Luke arrived from the barn looking pale but determined, dressed in clothes borrowed from Jim Peterson, a proper suit that transformed him from ranch hand to respectable suitor. When he saw Hannah, something flickered in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself," she managed, then added more seriously, "Are you ready for this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They rode to town in the wagon, the four of them silent with anticipation. The church loomed ahead, its white steeple stark against the winter sky. Other wagons and horses clustered around it. Half the town had turned out for this spectacle, drawn by gossip and the promise of scandal. "Remember," Margaret said as they climbed down from the wagon, "we're in the right. We've done nothing shameful. Don't let them make you feel otherwise." Hannah nodded, taking Luke's offered arm. Together, they walked up the church steps and into the lion's den. The board had assembled in the church's meeting room. Cyrus Blackwell, Pastor Yates, and 3 other elders, all men of influence and rigid propriety. They sat behind a long table like judges, with chairs arranged before them for Hannah and Luke. The room was packed with observers, every pew filled with townspeople eager to witness the proceedings. Hannah's stomach churned, but she held her head high as she and Luke took their seats. Margaret sat directly behind them with Samuel, a show of family solidarity. Cyrus Blackwell called the meeting to order with officious gravity. "We're here today to address concerns regarding the moral welfare of Mrs. Hannah Cooper and her household, specifically relating to the presence of one Luke Morrison, who claims to be a distant cousin." "Claims to be?" Luke spoke up immediately. "I am her cousin, sir. That's not in dispute." "Isn't it?" Blackwell's smile was oily. "We'll see about that. But first, let's address the primary concern, the impropriety of a young widow housing an unmarried man, regardless of familial connection." Pastor Yates cleared his throat. "Cyrus, I think we should hear from Mrs. Cooper first, allow her to explain." "The explanation is simple," Hannah interrupted, standing. Her voice rang clear in the crowded room. "Mr. Maddox came to us in need, injured and ill from the storm. We took him in out of Christian charity and family obligation. He has since secured employment with Jim Peterson and will soon have his own lodging. But more importantly," she looked at Luke, who stood to join her, "Mr. Maddox and I are engaged to be married." The room erupted. The cacophony of voices swelled like a wave crashing against the walls of the meeting room. Women gasped and clutched their shawls. Men muttered darkly to one another, and somewhere in the back, someone let out a scandalized laugh that was quickly stifled. Hannah stood frozen in the center of the storm, her hand finding Luke's and gripping it tightly as chaos erupted around them. Cyrus Blackwell's face had gone an alarming shade of crimson. He pounded his fist on the table with such force that the water pitcher jumped and nearly toppled. "Order! We will have order in this proceeding!" But the crowd was beyond his control now. Mrs. Henshaw stood up in her pew, her voice cutting through the din like a knife. "This is exactly what we feared. The woman has been compromised, seduced by this stranger who claims to be family." "She's corrupted herself," another voice shouted. "First her husband's crimes, now this shameless display." Pastor Yates tried to intervene, his hands raised for calm. "Please, everyone, let's maintain Christian decorum." "Christian decorum?" A man Hannah recognized as Porter, the livery owner, stepped forward. That woman's been living in sin under our very noses, and now she expects us to bless it with marriage? Luke's grip on Hannah's hand tightened, and she felt him tense beside her, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. But before he could speak, Margaret rose from her seat with a dignity that commanded attention. Enough! Her voice, though not loud, carried such authority that the room gradually quieted. You call yourselves Christians? You dare invoke morality while you stand here hurling accusations like stones at the adulteress? She looked around the room, her gaze withering. My daughter-in-law has done nothing wrong. She saved a man's life, her own flesh and blood, and nursed him back to health. That they have found affection in each other during this time is not scandalous. It's natural. It's human. And it's blessed by their intention to marry. Convenient timing for such intentions, Blackwell sneered, recovering his composure. Facing this board, facing questions about impropriety, suddenly they're engaged? Do you take us for fools? I take you for exactly what you are, Margaret shot back. Hypocrites who've been looking for any excuse to punish this family since Thomas Cooper died. Well, here's your excuse, isn't it? But dressed up as righteous concern, it's still just petty vindictiveness. The room erupted again, but this time with more divided voices. Some shouted agreement with Blackwell. Others seemed swayed by Margaret's words. Hannah saw Dr. Brennan stand, his weathered face set with determination. I'd like to speak, he called out, and gradually the noise subsided. I've known Hannah Cooper for years. I delivered her son, treated her husband in his final illness, and I can say without reservation that she is a woman of impeccable character. When Mr. Maddox arrived, ill and injured, she did what any decent person would do. She helped him. That's not sin. That's mercy. Dr. Brennan, Blackwell interrupted, your friendship with Mrs. Cooper is well known, but it doesn't change the facts. An unmarried man living under her roof, living in her barn, actually, Dr. Brennan corrected sharply, which I verified myself when I visited to check on his recovery. Mr. Maddox has been sleeping in the barn since the storm cleared, maintaining proper separation. What more do you want from them? The truth. Blackwell slammed his hand down again. The truth about this so-called cousin relationship, which I have reason to believe is entirely fabricated. Hannah's blood ran cold. This was it, the moment she'd feared. She felt Luke stiffen beside her, felt the weight of every eye in the room turning toward them. What evidence do you have for such an accusation? Pastor Yates asked, his voice tight with concern. Blackwell pulled a folded telegram from his pocket with the flourish of a man revealing a winning hand. I took the liberty of making inquiries, sent telegrams to courthouses in Missouri, to churches where the Morrison family supposedly had roots. And do you know what I discovered? He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes gleaming with triumph. There is no record of any Morrison family connected to the Coopers. No marriage licenses, no property deeds, no baptismal records. Nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her feet, felt every carefully constructed lie begin to crumble like a house built on sand. That's because you're looking in the wrong places, Luke said, and his voice was steady. Impossibly, remarkably steady. The Morrison connection isn't through Missouri courthouses or church records. It's through my mother's family, who moved frequently during the settlement years. They didn't always register with official institutions, especially during the conflicts of the 50s. Convenient, Blackwell spat. Very convenient that your family history conveniently escapes all documentation. Not all documentation, Margaret interjected, and Hannah turned to her in surprise. Her mother-in-law reached into her handbag and withdrew a worn envelope. I have letters from my own mother, mentioning her cousin Elizabeth Morrison, who married and moved west with her husband. The letters are dated 1851 and 1852. Elizabeth would be Luke's great-aunt, making the connection exactly as we've described. She handed the letters to Pastor Yates, who unfolded them carefully. Hannah's mind reeled. She'd never seen these letters, had no idea if they even mentioned anyone named Morrison. Was Margaret bluffing? Improvising? Or had she somehow... These appear genuine, Pastor Yates said slowly, examining the yellowed paper. The dates are consistent, and the handwriting... Cyrus, did your investigator specifically ask about Elizabeth Morrison? About connections through the female line. Blackwell's confident expression faltered slightly. I asked about the Cooper-Morrison connection. If there were records of women often disappear when they marry and take their husbands' names, Margaret said firmly, especially in the chaos of westward migration. But family letters remember, family memories preserve what official documents forget. Hannah stared at her mother-in-law, seeing her with new eyes. The letters might be real, might actually mention someone named Morrison in the distant family tree. Or they might be old correspondence that Margaret was cleverly repurposing, betting that Blackwell wouldn't examine them too closely, that the mere existence of period documents would be enough to cast doubt on his accusations. Either way, it was brilliant. Blackwell snatched the letters from Pastor Yates, scanning them with narrowed eyes. Hannah held her breath, watching his face for any sign of triumph or defeat. The room waited in tense silence, everyone leaning forward to catch what would come next. This proves nothing, Blackwell said finally, but there was less certainty in his voice now. Old letters mentioning a Morrison. It could be anyone. It doesn't prove this man is who he claims to be. And your telegrams don't prove he isn't, Dr. Brennan countered. All you've demonstrated is that record-keeping from 30 years ago is incomplete. That's hardly news, Cyrus. We all know how chaotic things were during the settlement period. Well, what I know, Blackwell said, his voice rising with frustration, is that this entire situation reeks of deception. A stranger appears in the middle of winter, conveniently claims family connection, and now, facing our scrutiny, suddenly announces an engagement to legitimize his presence. You're all being taken for fools. The only fool I see is you, Blackwell. The voice came from the back of the room, and Hannah turned to see Jim Peterson pushing his way through the crowd. The rancher was a bear of a man, with iron-gray hair and a face weathered by years of honest labor. I've been working alongside Luke Maddox for nearly a week now. He's a skilled hand, an honest worker, and a man of his word. You want to question his character? Question mine first, because I'd trust him with my life. Your endorsement doesn't change, Blackwell began, but Peterson wasn't finished. I'm not done talking. You want to stand there and judge Hannah Cooper? A woman who's kept her farm running through widowhood, who's raised her son with dignity despite this town's whispers, who saved a man's life when she could have let him die. That's the kind of character we should be celebrating, not tearing down. Murmurs of agreement rippled through some sections of the crowd. Hannah saw several faces, people she'd known for years, neighbors who'd kept their distance since Thomas's death, nodding slowly. But Blackwell wasn't conceding. Noble words, Peterson, but they don't address the fundamental impropriety. Engaged or not, they've been living under the same roof unmarried. That's not acceptable by any Christian standard. Then set a wedding date, Pastor Yates said quietly, and every head turned toward him. The pastor looked tired, as if the weight of mediating this conflict had aged him years in an hour. If your concern is truly about propriety and Christian standards, then let's enforce those standards properly. Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Cooper, if you're genuinely engaged, when do you plan to marry? Hannah's mind raced. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned beyond announcing the engagement. She looked at Luke, saw the same uncertainty in his eyes, and knew they were balanced on a knife's edge. Too soon would seem desperate, confirming Blackwell's suspicions. Too distant would suggest the engagement was merely a delaying tactic. 6 weeks, Luke said, and Hannah's heart skipped. I need time to save money for a proper home, to establish myself at Peterson's ranch. But 6 weeks should be sufficient. We'll marry in early April as soon as the ground thaws enough for spring planting to begin. 6 weeks, Blackwell repeated mockingly. And during those 6 weeks, what's to prevent continued impropriety? I'll move to the ranch, Luke interrupted. Mr. Peterson has offered me a bunk with the other hands. I'll live there, work there, and visit the Cooper farm only for supervised courtship under Mrs. Margaret Cooper's chaperonage. Will that satisfy your concerns about impropriety? The offer was perfect. It gave them the respectability the board demanded while maintaining their connection. Hannah wanted to kiss him for his quick thinking, but she settled for squeezing his hand in silent gratitude. Pastor Yates looked at the other board members. That seems more than reasonable. Mr. Maddox removes himself from Mrs. Cooper's household. They maintain a proper courtship. and marry within a respectable time frame. What objection can there be to such an arrangement? Two of the elders nodded slowly. The third, a pinched-faced man named Carmichael, still looked skeptical, but said nothing. Only Blackwell remained openly hostile, his face twisted with frustration. "This is a farce," he declared. "You're all being deceived by a pretty story and a few convenient documents. Mark my words, this will end in scandal and shame. The only shame I see is your behavior, Cyrus." Mrs. Patterson stood from her seat, and Hannah was surprised to see the usually reserved storekeeper's wife looking fierce. "You've conducted yourself like an inquisitor, not a Christian elder. You've made accusations without proof, hired investigators to spy on a grieving widow, and treated this entire proceeding like a personal vendetta." She looked around the room. "I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm satisfied with what I've heard. Hannah Cooper and Luke Maddox have announced honorable intentions. He's removing himself from her household to prevent any appearance of impropriety. What more do we need?" "I agree," said another voice, and then another. Soon a chorus of agreement rose from the assembled townspeople. Not everyone, not even a majority, but enough to shift the balance. Enough to make Blackwell's position untenable. Pastor Yates stood, his expression grave but resolute. "I believe we've heard sufficient testimony. Let's put this to a vote among the board members. All in favor of accepting Mr. Maddox and Mrs. Cooper's engagement as legitimate and their proposed arrangements as satisfactory to concerns about propriety?" 3 hands rose, Pastor Yates and the 2 elders who'd nodded earlier. "Opposed?" Blackwell's hand shot up, but Carmichael hesitated, looking between Blackwell and the rest of the board before finally lowering his hand to his lap. "Abstaining." "The motion carries," Pastor Yates announced. "Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Cooper, you have the board's blessing for your engagement, provided you adhere to the arrangements described: separate households, chaperoned courtship, and marriage within 6 weeks. Is that agreeable?" "Yes, Pastor," Hannah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees went weak. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," the pastor said quietly. "You've won this battle, but Cyrus isn't one to accept defeat gracefully. Be careful, both of you." Blackwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a scream. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I know what you are, Maddox. I know you're hiding something. And when the truth comes out, and it will, this entire house of cards will collapse." He swept his gaze across the room. "You've all been warned." He stormed out, and the room exhaled collectively, the tension breaking like a fever. People began talking in normal tones, some approaching Hannah and Luke with congratulations, others filing out with disapproving looks. Margaret pulled Hannah into a fierce embrace. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "Those letters," Hannah whispered back. "Were they real?" "Mostly. There was a Morrison cousin, though I doubt she was Luke's great-aunt specifically. But the dates are right, the basic facts are sound, and sometimes that's all you need. Enough truth to make the lie believable." She pulled back, her eyes twinkling. "Your late husband wasn't the only Cooper who knew how to bend facts to necessity." Samuel launched himself at Luke, wrapping his arms around the man's waist. "Does this mean you're really going to be my pa? Really and truly?" Luke knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "Really and truly, if that's what you want." "It's what I want," Samuel said solemnly. "I want you to stay forever." Hannah watched them, her heart so full it ached. Jim Peterson approached, clapping Luke on the shoulder. 6 weeks, you said. That means you'll be married before the spring roundup. Good timing. You can bring your new family to the ranch celebration. He nodded to Hannah. "Ma'am, you'll be welcome there. My wife's been looking forward to having another woman at these gatherings." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," Hannah said. "For everything, for speaking up, for giving Luke work." "Just gave him a job, ma'am. He's earned everything else himself." Peterson's eyes were kind. "You've got a good man there. Troubled past or not, what matters is who he is now. And now he's someone worth knowing." As the crowd dispersed, Dr. Brennan paused beside Hannah. "That was well done, all of you. But be watchful. Blackwell meant what he said. He won't let this go easily." "I know," Hannah said, "but we'll face it together." "See that you do." The doctor tipped his hat and followed the crowd out, leaving Hannah, Luke, Margaret, and Samuel alone in the gradually emptying room. Pastor Yates approached them, his expression weary but not unkind. I meant what I said about being careful. Cyrus has influence, and he's not above using it in underhanded ways. Keep your conduct beyond reproach. Follow the arrangements exactly as stated, and perhaps you'll come through this unscathed. We will, Pastor, Luke assured him. You have my word. See that I do. And Mr. Maddox? The pastor's eyes were sharp. Whatever secrets you're carrying, whatever truth Cyrus suspects, deal with it before the wedding. Don't let it become a weapon he can use against you later. After the pastor left, they stood in the quiet church, the four of them processing what had just happened. They'd won, but the victory felt fragile, like glass that might shatter at the slightest pressure. 6 weeks, Hannah said, turning to Luke. Can we really do this in 6 weeks? We have to, Luke replied. It's what we promised. And Hannah, he took both her hands in his. I meant it. I want to marry you, not just to satisfy the board or protect you from scandal. I want to build a life with you and Samuel, a real life. Even knowing that Blackwell will keep digging, that your past might catch up with us? Especially knowing that. Luke's grip tightened. I've spent years running, Hannah, running from debts, from consequences, from anything that might pin me down, but I'm done running. Whatever comes, we face it together. Margaret cleared her throat. That's very romantic, but we need to be practical. Luke, you need to move to the ranch today. The sooner you're established there, the less ammunition we give Blackwell. And we need to start planning a wedding, a proper one that shows this town we have nothing to hide. A wedding, Hannah repeated, the reality of it hitting her. In 6 weeks, she'd be married again. To a man she'd known less than 2 months. A man whose real name might not even be the one he'd given her, whose past was full of shadows and debts. But also a man who made her son laugh, who'd been willing to leave to protect them, who looked at her like she was something precious and rare. A spring wedding, she said, feeling a smile tug at her lips despite everything. With wildflowers, if they're blooming by then. Wildflowers, Luke echoed, and something softened in his expression. Hannah Cooper, you're going to be the death of me. Not if I can help it, she replied. I didn't pull a bullet out of you just so you could die of sentiment. Samuel giggled, breaking the moment's heaviness. Can I be in the wedding? Can I have a special job? You can stand up with us, Luke promised. Be my best man if you're willing. The boy's face lit up like sunrise. Really? I can do that? Really and truly. They left the church as a family, emerging into weak winter sunlight that felt like blessing. The town square was still busy with people from the meeting, and Hannah felt their eyes following her, heard the whispers that would fuel gossip for weeks to come. But she held her head high, Luke's hand in hers, and refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cower. At the wagon, Luke paused before helping her up. I'll come by tomorrow to collect my things from the barn. Move to Peterson's properly. Tomorrow is Sunday, Margaret reminded him. Come for dinner after church. It'll show the town that we're maintaining proper courtship, that you're welcome in our home under appropriate circumstances. Will people expect us at church tomorrow? Hannah asked, suddenly anxious, after everything that just happened. They'll expect us, Margaret said firmly, and we'll be there, showing them that we have nothing to be ashamed of. You're engaged now, officially and publicly. That gives you standing, protection. Use it. Luke kissed Hannah's hand before she climbed into the wagon, a gesture so courtly and proper that several watching townswomen actually smiled. Playing to the audience, Hannah realized, showing them the kind of man he was, or at least the kind of man he was becoming. The ride home was quiet, each of them lost in thought. Samuel eventually dozed off against Margaret's shoulder, exhausted by the emotional weight of the morning. Hannah watched the familiar landscape roll by and tried to imagine it 6 weeks from now, when everything would be different, when Luke would be her husband, when they'd be building a life together for real instead of just pretending for the town's benefit. Do you think the letters really helped? She asked Margaret quietly. The letters gave Pastor Yates an excuse to rule in our favor. Whether they were completely accurate or not is beside the point. They introduced doubt into Blackwell's accusations, and doubt was all we needed. You took a terrible risk producing them. Margaret's smile was grim. Everything we've done has been a terrible risk, Hannah. But sometimes terrible risks are the only path to survival. At the farm, Luke helped them unload the wagon and then stood awkwardly in the yard, clearly uncertain of the protocol now. Did he come inside, stay in the barn? The rules had changed, and none of them were quite sure what the new boundaries were. "Come in for coffee at least," Hannah said. "It's cold and we should talk about everything." Inside, Margaret busied herself with the coffee while Hannah stoked the fire. Samuel woke long enough to be sent up to the loft for a proper nap, leaving the three adults to discuss the future they'd committed to. 6 weeks isn't much time," Luke said, cradling his coffee cup. "For planning a wedding, for me to save money, for dealing with whatever Blackwell might uncover," Hannah finished. "Luke, your past, the gambling debts, the men you owe money to. How likely is it that they'll find you here?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I don't know. The men I was running from, they operate mostly in Colorado and Wyoming territories. Nebraska's outside their usual range. But if they hear my name, if someone mentions a Luke Maddox working in Cedar Falls," he set down his cup, "I'd be lying if I said there was no risk." "Then we prepare for it," Margaret said practically. "Luke, do you owe a specific amount, something that could be paid off if we had the money?" "Near $300, last I knew. Could be more now with interest." Luke laughed bitterly. "I don't have anything close to that. Won't for years, even with Peterson's wages. $300. It might as well have been $3,000 for all the likelihood of them raising it." Hannah thought of their meager savings, the small amount Thomas had hidden away that she'd been hoarding for emergencies, maybe $40 if she was generous in her counting. "We'll figure something out," she said with more confidence than she felt. "And in the meantime, you'll be at Peterson's ranch, surrounded by people. That's safer than being alone on the road." "Safer for me, maybe, but if trouble comes looking, it'll find you too." "Find Samuel." The agony in Luke's voice was palpable. "Don't you dare," Hannah interrupted. "Don't you dare say you should leave. We're past that, Luke. We've made our choice, announced it to the whole town. Running now would destroy everything we've built and leave us all worse off than before." "She's right," Margaret added. "Whatever happens, it happens to all of us now. We're a family, dysfunctional and held together by lies, perhaps, but a family nonetheless." Luke looked between them, and Hannah saw him struggling with emotions he didn't know how to express. Finally, he just nodded, accepting the truth of their entanglement. They spent the next hour making practical plans. Luke would attend church with them tomorrow, then move to Peterson's ranch afterward. He'd visit on Wednesday and Saturday evenings for supervised courtship, dinners with the family, walks in view of the house, all the proper behaviors that engaged couples were expected to follow. The wedding would be simple, held at the church with Pastor Yates officiating, followed by a small gathering at the farm. "We'll need to let people know you're engaged," Margaret said. "Send word to relatives, even the distant ones. The more family we have attending, the more legitimate it all appears." "I have a sister," Luke said suddenly, and both women looked at him in surprise. "Sarah. In St. Louis. I haven't seen her in years, but maybe I should write to her. Tell her I'm getting married." "That's a good idea," Hannah encouraged. "She's your only family?" "Only one that matters. My father's side disowned me years ago when I left the farm. But Sarah," his voice softened, "she deserved better than I gave her. Maybe this is a chance to make amends." "Write to her tonight," Margaret suggested. "We can post it tomorrow after church. If she can come for the wedding, all the better." As afternoon faded to evening, Luke reluctantly prepared to return to the barn for what would be one of his last nights there. Hannah walked him to the door, Margaret discreetly busying herself elsewhere to give them a moment of privacy. "Are you frightened?" Luke asked quietly. "Of what we're doing, of how fast it's all happening." "Terrified," Hannah admitted, "but also hopeful. For the first time since Thomas died, I can imagine a future that's more than just surviving. That has to count for something. It counts for everything." Luke touched her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I won't let you down, Hannah. I swear it. Whatever it takes to be the man you deserve, to be the father Samuel needs, I'll do it." "Just be you," she said. "That's all I'm asking for." He kissed her then, softly and sweetly, a promise of more to come. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. 6 weeks, he said. 6 weeks, she agreed. That night, Hannah lay in the loft beside her sleeping son and thought about everything that had happened. The board meeting, the confrontation with Blackwell, the narrow victory that felt both triumphant and precarious. The engagement that was real even though it had started as strategy. The wedding that would bind her to a man whose past might destroy them all. But mostly she thought about Luke, about the way he looked at Samuel, the gentle strength in his hands, the determination in his voice when he'd promised not to run anymore. Whatever happened in the next 6 weeks, whatever challenges they faced, she believed in that determination, believed in him. And that belief, fragile and fierce, would have to be enough to carry them through. Sunday morning brought its own anxieties. Hannah dressed with extra care, choosing her most respectable dress and pinning her hair in a severe bun that screamed propriety. Margaret did the same, and they made Samuel wear his Sunday best despite his protests. "We're showing them that we take this seriously," Margaret explained as she scrubbed the boy's face, "that we're respectable people who deserve respect in return." Luke met them at church, freshly shaved and wearing his borrowed suit. Together they walked up the church steps, and Hannah felt the weight of every stare, heard the sudden hush that fell over conversations as they passed. They sat in their usual pew, Hannah and Samuel with Margaret on the end, and Luke sitting between Samuel and the aisle. A small statement of family order that Hannah hoped people would notice. Pastor Yates's sermon seemed chosen specifically for their situation, full of talk about forgiveness and second chances, about not judging others lest you be judged. Several times, his eyes drifted to where they sat, and Hannah wondered if he was trying to help or simply covering all his bases. After the service, as people filed out, several church members approached to offer congratulations on the engagement. Mrs. Patterson pressed Hannah's hand warmly. Dr. Brennan shook Luke's hand and invited them to dinner sometime. Even a few of the women who'd been coldest to Hannah since Thomas's death offered stiff but not unfriendly greetings. But others, Blackwell chief among them, kept their distance, their disapproval evident in every rigid line of their bodies. "Small victories," Margaret murmured as they walked to the wagon. "Every person who accepts this, who treats you as a legitimate couple, weakens Blackwell's position." Sunday dinner at the farm was both celebration and farewell. Margaret outdid herself with a roast chicken that used up most of their remaining stores, but none of them mentioned the sacrifice. This was important, marking the occasion, creating a memory they could hold on to in harder times. Samuel chattered throughout the meal, talking about the wedding and what he'd wear and whether there would be cake. His excitement was infectious, and Hannah found herself laughing more than she had in months. After dinner, Luke packed his few belongings from the barn, a pitiful collection of possessions that spoke to how little he'd had when he arrived. Hannah watched from the doorway, fighting the urge to ask him to stay just one more night. "I'll see you Wednesday," he promised, shouldering his pack. "For dinner, like we planned." "Wednesday," Hannah agreed. "And Luke? Be careful at the ranch. Watch yourself around the other hands. We don't know who might be talking to Blackwell." "I will." He hesitated, then pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Take care of yourself." And Samuel. "We will." She watched him ride away on a horse borrowed from Peterson, watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she returned to the house, to Margaret and Samuel, and the life that would be hers for the next 3 days until she saw Luke again. It felt like the longest 3 days of her life. Wednesday evening couldn't come fast enough. Hannah found herself watching the road obsessively, listening for hoofbeats, her heart jumping at every sound. When Luke finally appeared, riding up to the farm just as the sun was setting, relief flooded through her so intensely that she had to grip the doorframe for support. He looked tired, his clothes dusty from ranch work, but he smiled when he saw her. "Missed me?" "Terribly," she admitted, not caring how desperate it sounded. Dinner was a comfortable affair, with Luke regaling them with stories from the ranch, the other hands, the work preparing for Roundup, Peterson's gruff kindness. Samuel hung on every word, and Hannah found herself memorizing the way Luke's eyes crinkled when he laughed, the gestures he made while talking, all the small details that made him real. After dinner, they walked, properly chaperoned by Margaret, who stayed within sight but far enough away to give them the illusion of privacy. How are the other hands treating you? Hannah asked as they strolled along the fence line. Well enough. A few are suspicious, strangers showing up, getting hired on right away. But Peterson vouches for me, and that carries weight. He paused. One of them asked if I was the Luke Maddox from Colorado. Said he'd heard the name before. Hannah's blood ran cold. What did you say? Said it was a common enough name, could be any number of Luke Maddoxes in the territories. He seemed to accept it, but Luke's jaw tightened. It's a reminder that my past isn't as buried as I'd like to think. We'll deal with it if it becomes a problem, Hannah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Together, remember? Together, he agreed, taking her hand. They walked in silence for a while, both aware of Margaret's watchful presence, of the need to maintain propriety even in private moments. But it was enough, Hannah thought. His hand in hers, his presence solid and real beside her. It was enough for now. Saturday's visit followed a similar pattern, but with the added task of planning wedding details. Margaret had lists, flowers to order, food to prepare, the simple dress Hannah would wear. Luke contributed what he could, but it was clear the domestic details overwhelmed him. I just need to show up, right? He joked at one point. Everything else is your department. You need to write your vows, Margaret corrected. Pastor Yates will provide the standard ceremony, but you'll each speak your own promises. Start thinking about what you want to say. Luke paled slightly at the thought. I'm not good with words, Margaret. I wouldn't know where to start. Start with the truth, Hannah suggested. What do you want to promise me? What kind of life do you want us to build? He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw vulnerability and hope tangled together. I want to promise you safety, that I'll work every day to be worthy of what you've given me, that I'll love Samuel like he's my own, that I'll never lie to you again, even when the truth is hard. His voice dropped. That I'll love you, Hannah, for whatever time we're given. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. That's a good start, she managed. The second week passed in a blur of similar visits and mounting anticipation. Luke was establishing himself at the ranch, earning respect through hard work and honest dealing. Hannah fielded questions from curious townspeople about wedding plans, deflecting the nosier inquiries with practiced ease. But underneath the mundane preparations, tension built. Blackwell was unnaturally quiet, and that silence felt more threatening than any confrontation. Dr. Brennan warned them that the elder was still investigating, still determined to find something, anything, to use against them. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. Hannah was in the chicken coop gathering eggs when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Her stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from groups of riders appearing unannounced. She emerged from the coop to find 4 men dismounting in her yard. 3 she didn't recognize, hard-faced men with the look of drifters, or worse. But the 4th was familiar, though she couldn't immediately place him. Mrs. Cooper? The familiar man tipped his hat, and something about the gesture triggered her memory. She'd seen him before, somewhere in town, talking with Blackwell outside the general store. We're looking for a man named Luke Maddox. Heard he might be staying here. Hannah's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Mr. Maddox is my fiancé. He works at Peterson's ranch. Why are you looking for him? He owes us money, one of the other men said, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Quite a lot of money, matter of fact. Been tracking him for months. These were the men Luke had been running from, the debt collectors, or perhaps more accurately, the enforcers. And Blackwell had led them here. I don't know anything about debts, Hannah said, fighting to keep her fear from showing. But Mr. Maddox isn't here. You'll have to speak with him at the Peterson ranch. We'll do that, the first man said. But see, we have it on good authority that Maddox has been living here. Might be he left something behind. You mind if we look around? Yes, I mind. This is private property, and you have no right. We have the right of debt collection, ma'am. Your fiancé stole from us, and we aim to get it back one way or another. Margaret appeared in the doorway, Samuel clinging to her skirts. Hannah, what's happening? These men are leaving, Hannah said firmly, right now. The men exchanged glances, and Hannah saw the calculation in their eyes. 4 of them, 3 women and a child. They could do whatever they wanted, and no one would stop them. But then hoofbeats sounded again, and Jim Peterson rode into the yard with Luke and 2 other ranch hands. Luke went pale when he saw the 4 men, but he dismounted slowly, deliberately. "I should have known Blackwell would find a way to contact you," he said to the men. "How much did he pay you to come here?" "Didn't pay us nothing," the first man replied. "Just sent word that you were in Cedar Falls living under a false name with some widow woman. We would have come anyway, Maddox. You owe us $350, and we aim to collect." $350? Luke's voice was tight. "It was $300 when I left. Interest, Maddox. Call it the cost of making us chase you halfway across the territories." Luke looked at Hannah, and she saw the defeat in his eyes. This was what he'd been running from, what he'd feared would destroy everything they'd built. And now it was here, in her yard, threatening her family. "I don't have the money," Luke said. "I'm working honest wages now, but I don't have that kind of cash." "Then we'll take it out of your hide," one of the other men said, stepping forward. "No." Hannah's voice rang out clear and strong. "You won't touch him." The men turned to her, surprised. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." "It concerns me absolutely. He's my fiancé, and this is my property. You want your money? Then we'll get you your money. But you'll leave him alone." "Hannah, no," Luke protested. "You can't." $350, Hannah said, her mind racing. "Give us 1 week to raise it. We'll pay you in full, and you'll leave and never come back." The men considered this. "How do we know you're good for it? You're just a widow with a farm." "I'm a woman with resources and determination," Hannah interrupted. 1 week, that's all I'm asking. You've tracked him this far. Surely you can wait 7 more days for guaranteed payment." The leader studied her, and Hannah stared back unflinching. Finally, he nodded. 1 week. We'll be at the hotel in Cedar Falls. But if you don't pay, we take it out of Maddox however we can. Understood?" "Understood." The men mounted their horses and rode away, leaving a silence heavy with implications. Hannah stood frozen, her mind reeling from what she'd just promised. $350. They didn't have it, couldn't raise it. She just bought them a week of borrowed time with money that didn't exist. "Hannah," Luke said quietly, and there was such pain in his voice that she couldn't look at him. "What have you done?" "What I had to," she replied. But inside she was asking herself the same question, and she had no answer. Only the terrifying certainty that their time had just run out. Jim Peterson was the first to break the silence that settled over the yard like a suffocating blanket. He dismounted slowly, his weathered face grave as he approached Hannah. "Mrs. Cooper, you just promised those men $350 you don't have. You understand what they'll do when you can't pay?" "I understand perfectly, Mr. Peterson." Hannah's voice was steadier than she felt. "But I had to buy us time. Time to think, to plan, to find a solution." "There is no solution." Luke's voice cracked as he stepped toward her, his hands trembling. "Hannah, those men, they're not the type to negotiate or show mercy. When we can't pay, they'll take it out on all of us. They'll destroy the farm, hurt you and Samuel." "Then we find the money," Hannah interrupted, forcing steel into her voice even as panic clawed at her throat. "Somehow we find it." Margaret had ushered Samuel back into the house, away from the confrontation, and now she returned with her shawl pulled tight against more than just the cold. "Hannah, child, we have maybe $40 saved. The farm barely produces enough to keep us fed. Where on earth would we find 300 more?" "We could sell the farm," Hannah said, the words tasting like ash. "It's worth something." "Not enough. And not in a week," Peterson said gently. "Land sales take time, paperwork, negotiations. And even if you could sell quickly, you'd get pennies on the dollar from desperate sellers." Luke paced like a caged animal, his hands raking through his hair. "This is my fault. All of it. Those debts, those men coming here, putting you in danger. God, Hannah, I've destroyed everything you've worked for." "Stop it!" Hannah grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Stop talking like it's over. We have 7 days to find a solution." "What solution?" The despair in Luke's eyes was almost more than she could bear. "I could run again, draw them away from you." "No!" The word exploded from Hannah with such force that everyone startled. You run, and they'll assume we helped you, that we're hiding the money. They'll tear this place apart looking for it, and when they don't find it—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the violence that would follow. One of Peterson's ranch hands, a young man named Tommy, spoke up hesitantly. "There's the spring dance in Cedar Falls on Saturday. Folks come from all over, and there's usually gambling in the back room of the saloon. If someone had a stake, they could maybe win." "Absolutely not," Peterson cut him off. "That's how Maddox got into this mess in the first place. We're not gambling our way out of gambling debts." But something in Hannah's mind had caught on the idea, turning it over, examining it from different angles. "Not gambling," she said slowly, "but the dance. People bring things to sell, don't they? Preserves, crafts, livestock?" "Sometimes," Margaret confirmed, her brow furrowed. "But Hannah, we don't have anything worth that kind of money. The chickens might bring $10 if we're lucky, and we need them for eggs." "What about Thomas's tools?" Hannah was thinking frantically now, cataloging everything they owned. "His carpentry tools, the good ones his father left him. And there's Bessie. She's a good milk cow, worth maybe $30 to the right buyer. $40 total, maybe $50 if you're blessed with generous buyers," Margaret calculated. "That's still $300 short." "My saddle," Luke said suddenly. "The one I rode in on. It's custom made, worth at least $40. And Peterson, didn't you say you needed someone to break those wild horses you bought? I could do it, earn extra wages, in a week?" Peterson shook his head. "Son, breaking horses takes time. You might earn $10, $15 if you're lucky and don't get yourself killed in the process." Hannah's mind raced through their options, each one inadequate, each one leaving them dozens or hundreds of dollars short. The farm, the tools, the livestock, Luke's wages. Even if they liquidated everything they owned, they'd barely scrape together a third of what was needed. "There has to be something," she whispered, "something we're not seeing." Margaret's face had gone very still, the way it did when she was wrestling with a difficult decision. "There is one thing," she said quietly, "one thing that might bring the money we need." Everyone turned to her. Hannah felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "My mother's jewelry," Margaret continued, her voice heavy. "She left it to me when she passed. I've kept it hidden all these years, never told Thomas about it because I knew he'd want to sell it during the hard times. There's a necklace, garnets and gold, and a ring with a small diamond. Together, they might be worth $200, maybe more to the right buyer." Hannah's breath caught. "Mother Margaret, that's your inheritance. Your mother's memory is less important than my grandson's future," Margaret said firmly. "Less important than keeping this family together. What good are jewels if we lose everything else?" Luke looked stricken. "I can't let you do that. Those are your only valuable possessions. And what are possessions compared to people I love?" Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've watched you with Samuel, Luke Maddox. I've seen how you look at my daughter-in-law. You've become family, truly family, and family protects each other, even when it costs us everything." The words hung in the air, heavy with sacrifice and love. Hannah felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Even with the jewelry, we'd still be short, 50, maybe $100 short. Then we pray for generous buyers," Margaret said, "and we trust that God provides for those who help themselves." Peterson cleared his throat roughly. "I could advance you some wages, Maddox. Maybe $20 against your next month's work. It's not much, but it's more than generous, Jim. Thank you." Luke's voice was thick with emotion. "And I'll talk to Dr. Brennan," Peterson continued. "See if he knows anyone looking to buy quality farm tools or livestock. Might get you better prices than the dance crowd would offer." Over the next hour, they made a plan. Margaret would retrieve the jewelry she'd kept hidden for decades. Hannah would inventory everything of value they owned. Luke would return to the ranch and work extra hours, taking on the most dangerous jobs that paid premium wages. Peterson would spread word among his contacts about items for sale. And on Saturday, they would go to the spring dance with everything they had, hoping against hope that it would be enough. As the men prepared to leave, Luke pulled Hannah aside, his face etched with guilt and anguish. "I should never have stayed. Should never have let it get this far. Now you're selling everything. Margaret's giving up her mother's jewelry, all because of my debts. All because I chose to save your life." Hannah corrected gently. I made that choice knowing it could cost me, and I'd make it again, Luke, every single time. Even now? Even knowing it might cost you the farm, your security, everything? Hannah thought about it, really thought about it. She could be angry, could rage at the unfairness of it all, could blame Luke for bringing this destruction to her door. But when she looked at him, at this man who'd been willing to die rather than endanger them, who loved her son like his own, who'd stopped running because she'd asked him to, she found she couldn't. Even now, she said. We'll get through this, Luke. Together. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him shaking against her. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I don't think I've said it properly, but I love you, Hannah Cooper. And I swear, if we survive this, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I love you too, she whispered back. And I don't need you to make anything up to me. I just need you to stay, to fight with me instead of running from me. I'm not running anymore. I promise you that. They held each other until Peterson called that they needed to get back to the ranch before dark. Luke kissed her once, desperately, and then he was gone, riding away with Peterson and the ranch hands, leaving Hannah and Margaret to face the task of dismantling their life piece by piece. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Margaret brought out a small wooden box from a hiding place beneath the floorboards of her room. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, were the jewels, a necklace of deep red garnets set in delicate gold filigree, and a ring with a modest but clear diamond surrounded by tiny pearls. They were my mother's, Margaret said, running her fingers over the necklace. Given to her by my father on their wedding day. She wore them on special occasions, and when she died, she made me promise to keep them safe, to pass them down to my daughter if I had one. You don't have to do this, Hannah said, though she knew even as she spoke that they had no other choice. Yes, I do. My mother would understand. She valued family above all else. These jewels were symbols of love, and what better use for them than to save the family she cherished? Margaret carefully rewrapped the jewelry. Besides, I have something better to pass down to Samuel than garnets and gold. I have the story of how his family fought for each other, how they refused to give up even when everything seemed lost. Hannah embraced her mother-in-law, overwhelmed by the sacrifice she was making. I'll find a way to buy them back someday. I promise you, hush, child. Some things aren't meant to be bought back. They're meant to be released so that new things can grow. Margaret held her at arm's length, her eyes fierce. Now, let's make a list of everything else we can sell. We have 6 days to raise $350, and we're going to do it. They worked late into the night, cataloging every item of value in the house. Thomas's tools, his saws, his planes, his precious spirit level that had been his grandfather's, the quilt Hannah had made for their wedding, worth something to collectors of fine needlework. 3 of their 5 chickens, keeping only enough to maintain a small egg supply. Bessie the cow, who'd been with them since Samuel was born. Even some of Hannah's books, the precious few she'd managed to keep from her mother's collection. Each item represented a memory, a piece of their life together. Letting them go felt like carving away parts of herself. But Hannah forced herself to stay practical, to see each possession only in terms of the dollars it might bring. By midnight, they had a list worth approximately $220 if everything sold at fair prices. With Margaret's jewelry potentially bringing another $200 and Luke's saddle adding 40 more, they would have enough. Barely, with no room for negotiation or bad luck, but enough. It's going to work, Hannah said, trying to convince herself as much as Margaret. It has to work. The next morning brought Dr. Brennan to their door, summoned by Jim Peterson. The doctor examined their list with a practiced eye, nodding occasionally. I can help you get fair prices for some of these, he said. The tools especially. I know a carpenter in the next town over who's been looking for quality equipment. He'll pay better than dance crowd prices. He paused at the mention of Margaret's jewelry. Margaret, are you certain about this? As certain as I've ever been about anything, Samuel. Dr. Brennan had known Margaret since they were children, and Hannah saw understanding pass between them. Then I'll make sure you get top dollar for them. There's a jeweler in Omaha I correspond with. I can telegraph him, see if he's interested in making an offer. We need the money by Saturday, Hannah said. We can't wait for mail to go back and forth. Telegraph is faster than mail. If he's interested and makes a fair offer, he can wire the money to the bank here in Cedar Falls. You could have it by Friday. Dr. Brennan folded the list and tucked it in his pocket. Let me see what I can do. In the meantime, you two should focus on the items we can sell locally. Over the next few days, the farm transformed as piece by piece, their life was packed up and priced. The carpenter from the next town came and bought Thomas's tools for $60, more than Hannah had dared hope. A farmer looking to expand his dairy operation paid $35 for Bessie, promising to treat her well. The quilts, the books, the chickens, everything found buyers, often for more than Hannah had estimated. By Thursday evening, they had $240 in hand, with Margaret's jewelry still waiting for the jeweler's response and Luke's saddle yet to be sold. They were close, so heartbreakingly close, but still short. Luke visited that evening, his face haggard from working double shifts at the ranch. He'd earned an extra $15 breaking horses, despite a vicious kick that had left his ribs bruised and his breathing shallow. You shouldn't have pushed yourself so hard, Hannah said, gently touching the purple bruise that spread across his side. You could have been killed. $15 closer to saving us is worth a few bruises. He caught her hand, pressing it to his chest. I'd do worse if it meant keeping you safe. They sat together at the kitchen table, counting and recounting their money, trying to make the numbers add up to salvation. $240 in hand, $15 from Luke's extra work, $40 from his saddle once it sold. That was $295, still $55 short, even before accounting for the jewelry. Dr. Brennan said the jeweler's offer would come tomorrow, Margaret reminded them. And Saturday's dance will bring more buyers. We're not defeated yet. But the worry in her voice betrayed her optimism. They were running out of time and out of things to sell. Friday morning brought both hope and despair in equal measure. Dr. Brennan arrived with a telegram from the Omaha jeweler, an offer of $150 for both pieces, significantly less than Margaret had hoped. He says the garnets are nice but not exceptional, and the diamond is quite small, Dr. Brennan explained, his tone apologetic. In a larger city, you might get more, but for a quick sale. $150. Added to their $295, that was $445, nearly $100 more than they needed. Hannah felt dizzy with relief. We'll take it, Margaret said firmly. Wire him that we accept. Already did, anticipating your answer. The money should be at the bank by this afternoon. Dr. Brennan smiled, the first genuine smile Hannah had seen from him in days. You did it. You're going to make the payment. But Hannah's relief was tempered by the reality of what they'd sacrificed. The farm was stripped of everything valuable. Margaret's inheritance was gone, and they'd be starting their marriage with nothing but debts paid and a roof over their heads. It was survival, but barely. Luke seemed to sense her thoughts. We'll rebuild, he said quietly. I'll work every hour God gives me. We'll buy new tools, new livestock. We'll fill the house again with things that matter. Things don't matter, Hannah said, and she meant it. We still have each other. We still have Samuel. Everything else is just things. That afternoon they went to the bank together, Hannah, Margaret, and Luke. The money had arrived as Dr. Brennan promised, and they withdrew the full $350, watching the clerk count it out in bills that represented everything they owned. Tomorrow morning, we'll pay those men, Hannah said as they walked back to the wagon. Get them out of our lives forever. And then, Luke asked, and then we get married, like we planned. We start our life together, properly this time, without debts hanging over us. Hannah squeezed his hand. We start fresh. The money was safely hidden at the farm that night, secured in Margaret's hiding place beneath the floorboards. Samuel, blessedly unaware of how close they'd come to disaster, chattered excitedly about the spring dance tomorrow night. Will there be music and dancing? Can I stay up late? Yes, and we'll see, Hannah answered, pulling him close. But first we have something important to do tomorrow morning. More important than dancing? Much more important. We're going to make sure that we can have many more dances together for years to come. Saturday dawned clear and bright, as if the weather itself was blessing their efforts. Hannah dressed carefully, putting on her best dress, one of the few nice things she hadn't needed to sell. Luke arrived early, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. They rode to Cedar Falls together, the money secured in a leather pouch that Luke kept close to his body. The town was already bustling with preparations for the evening's dance, but Hannah's focus was singular. They were here to pay a debt, to buy their freedom. The four men were waiting at the hotel, lounging on the porch like predators who'd already captured their prey. When they saw Luke and Hannah approaching, the leader stood, his expression smug. "Mrs. Cooper, Maddox, didn't think you'd actually come up with the money. Then you thought wrong," Hannah said, her voice cold. "We have your $350. Every penny of it." Luke pulled out the pouch and opened it, showing the bills inside. "Count it if you want. It's all there." The leader took the pouch, riffling through the money with practiced fingers. His expression shifted from smugness to surprise to something almost like respect. "Well, I'll be damned. You actually did it." He looked at Luke with new eyes. "Most men in your position would have run, left the woman to face us alone." "I'm not most men," Luke said quietly. "Not anymore." The leader nodded slowly, then pocketed the money. "Debt's paid, Maddox. You're clear. And for what it's worth—" He glanced at Hannah. "You picked a good woman here. Don't waste what she's given you." "I won't." The men mounted their horses, preparing to leave. But before they rode off, the leader turned back one more time. "That Blackwell fellow who pointed us your way? He's not done with you. Said he'd pay us extra if we roughed you up some, sent a message. We told him no. We're debt collectors, not hired thugs, but thought you should know what kind of enemy you've made." Then they were gone, riding out of Cedar Falls and out of their lives forever. Hannah felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long it had become part of her. The debt was paid. They were free. Broke, with nothing left to their names but a mortgaged farm and each other, but free. "It's done," she whispered, and Luke pulled her into his arms right there on the main street of Cedar Falls, propriety be damned. "It's done," he agreed, "and now we can actually start our life together." They spent the rest of the day in a daze of relief and exhaustion. Margaret had insisted they still attend the evening's dance. "We need to show this town we have nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of." So as the sun set, they returned to Cedar Falls dressed in their finest. The dance was held in the church hall, transformed with spring flowers and lanterns that cast everything in a warm golden glow. Music spilled out into the street, and Hannah felt something loosen in her soul as they entered. People stared, of course. They always stared at Hannah Cooper and her mysterious fiancé, but tonight, Hannah found she didn't care. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She'd just paid $350 to protect this man, had sold everything she owned to keep him safe. Their opinions meant nothing compared to that. "Mrs. Cooper," Pastor Yates approached them, his expression warm. "I'm glad you came. And Mr. Maddox, I heard about your troubles with those debt collectors. I'm relieved it was resolved peacefully." "Peacefully and permanently, Pastor," Luke confirmed. "We're starting fresh now with nothing hanging over us." "A good foundation for a marriage," the pastor observed. "Speaking of which, we should finalize the ceremony details. 2 weeks until the wedding, yes?" 2 weeks, Hannah confirmed, and the reality of it sent a thrill through her. In 2 weeks she'd be married. To Luke. For real, with no more pretense or careful lies. Just truth and love and the future they'd fought so hard to claim. The evening passed in a blur of music and cautious celebration. Dr. Brennan danced with Margaret, making her laugh in a way Hannah hadn't heard in years. Jim Peterson arrived with his wife, who pulled Hannah aside to welcome her to the ranching community and offer help with the wedding preparations. And Luke barely left Hannah's side. They danced together, properly and at a respectful distance, but Hannah could feel the promise in every touch, in every look they exchanged. This was just the beginning. They'd survived the worst. Everything else would be easier. Samuel fell asleep on a bench around 9 o'clock, worn out by excitement and music. Hannah was arranging a blanket over him when she heard Cyrus Blackwell's voice cut through the festivities. Quite a touching scene, the happy family, all debts paid, ready to start their new life together. His tone dripped with venom. "I wonder how long it will last." Hannah straightened, turning to face him. "Our happiness is no concern of yours, Mr. Blackwell." "Isn't it? I'm an elder of this church, responsible for the moral welfare of this community. And I can't help but notice that your miraculous debt payment came awfully quickly. Makes a man wonder where that kind of money came from. Honest work and honest sales, Luke said, stepping to Hannah's side. We sold our possessions, earned every dollar. There's nothing suspicious about it. Sold your possessions? Blackwell's laugh was ugly. You mean you stripped that farm bare? Sold the widow's inheritance to pay for your mistakes? That's not noble, Maddox. That's selfish. It was my choice, Hannah interjected, her voice sharp. Everything we sold, every dollar we raised, it was my decision. Luke tried to refuse, tried to run rather than let us sacrifice for him. But I chose to fight for him, for us, and I'd do it again. Then you're a fool, Blackwell spat. He'll drag you down with him. Men like Maddox don't change. They just find new ways to disappoint the people who trust them. Luke's hands clenched into fists, and Hannah saw him struggling to control his temper. Before he could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. That's enough, Cyrus. Mrs. Henshaw, of all people, stood beside them, her expression stern. You've made your disapproval clear, but the board has approved their engagement. The debts are paid. What more do you want? Blackwell turned to her, surprised. Constance, you yourself said this arrangement was scandalous. I said it appeared improper when we didn't know the full story, Mrs. Henshaw corrected. But I've watched them these past weeks. I've seen how Mr. Maddox looks at Hannah, how he is with young Samuel, and I've seen how Hannah has fought for him, sacrificed for him. That's not scandal, Cyrus. That's love. And I won't stand by while you try to destroy it out of spite. Other voices joined hers. Mrs. Patterson, Dr. Brennan, Jim Peterson, even some who'd been coldest to Hannah found themselves defending her against Blackwell's viciousness. It was as if the town had collectively decided that enough was enough, that Hannah Cooper had earned the right to her happiness through sheer determination and sacrifice. Blackwell looked around at the faces arrayed against him, and something ugly twisted in his expression. You're all fools, he declared, and when this ends in disaster, when Maddox shows his true colors and destroys that family, don't say I didn't warn you. He stormed out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Hannah felt Luke's arm around her waist, steady and strong, and she leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. Thank you, she said to Mrs. Henshaw, to all of them. You didn't have to stand up for us. Yes, we did, Mrs. Henshaw said firmly. This town has been cruel to you for too long, Hannah. Your husband's reputation, the whispers, the judgment, none of it was fair. You deserve better. You deserve happiness. And if that happiness is with Mr. Maddox, then we should support it, not tear it down. The mood of the dance shifted after that, became lighter, more genuinely celebratory. People approached Hannah and Luke to offer congratulations, to share their own stories of struggle and perseverance, to welcome them as a couple. It felt like a turning point, like the town was finally ready to let Hannah step out from under the shadow of Thomas's disgrace. As midnight approached and the dance wound down, Hannah found herself standing outside the church hall with Luke, looking up at the stars that glittered overhead like promises. 2 weeks, Luke said, pulling her close. 2 weeks, and you'll be my wife. 2 weeks, Hannah agreed. And then we start building our life together, for real this time. With nothing but a mortgaged farm and each other. That's more than enough, Hannah said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. We'll make it enough. The final 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation that felt almost dreamlike after the intensity of the debt crisis. Hannah's wedding dress was simple, her best Sunday dress with new lace that Margaret had traded for by mending Mrs. Patterson's winter coats. Samuel's role as best man was taken very seriously, with Luke teaching him how to hold the rings and when to step forward during the ceremony. The church was decorated with early spring wildflowers, not many, as most hadn't bloomed yet, but enough to add color and hope to the simple space. Dr. Brennan would give Hannah away, standing in for the father she'd lost years ago. Jim Peterson and his wife had insisted on hosting a small reception at their ranch after the ceremony, refusing to let Hannah and Luke celebrate in the stripped-bare farmhouse. On the morning of the wedding, Hannah woke to find Margaret sitting on the edge of her bed, a package wrapped in brown paper in her hands. I have something for you, Margaret said quietly. For the wedding. Hannah sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mother Margaret, you've already given everything. Hush, open it. Inside the package was a veil, delicate lace, yellowed slightly with age but still beautiful. Hannah recognized it immediately. "This was yours," she whispered, "from your wedding to Thomas's father. And now it's yours. Every bride should have something old, something borrowed. This is both." Margaret's eyes glistened with tears. "You're the daughter I never had, Hannah. I want you to have this, to carry a piece of our family's happiness into your new marriage." Hannah clutched the veil to her chest, overcome with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be happy. Say you'll love Luke the way he deserves to be loved, and let him love you the same way. That's all I ask." "I will," Hannah promised. "I will." At the church, as Hannah stood in the small anteroom adjusting her veil, she heard the murmur of the congregation gathering. More people had come than she'd expected, friends and neighbors, ranchers from Peterson's spread, even a few who'd been cold to her before. The town was bearing witness to this union, blessing it with their presence. Dr. Brennan knocked softly on the door. "Ready, my dear?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The music started, simple piano played by the church organist, and Hannah stepped into the sanctuary on Dr. Brennan's arm. Her eyes immediately found Luke, standing at the altar with Samuel beside him. Luke wore a borrowed suit that fit reasonably well, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression a mixture of awe and joy as he watched her approach. Samuel grinned at her, practically bouncing with excitement at his important role. Margaret sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. And beyond them, the gathered community watched with expressions ranging from warm approval to cautious acceptance. But Hannah saw none of it clearly. Her focus was on Luke, on the way his eyes never left her face, on the slight tremble in his hands as she reached the altar and took her place beside him. Pastor Yates began the ceremony, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and blessing. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join together Hannah Marie Cooper and Luke James Maddox in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Hannah like a balm. This was real. After everything, the lies, the debts, the sacrifice, the fear, this moment was real and true and hers to claim. When it came time for the vows, Luke's voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Hannah, I came to your barn broken and dying, with nothing to offer but trouble and debts. You saved my life, not just in body but in spirit. You showed me that redemption is possible, that a man can change, that love is worth fighting for. I promise to spend every day earning the gift you've given me.